There's a huge dichotomy if you look from 2018 to my retirement, September 22, because of politics and legislation. And I say that because if I retire 2017, it's my contention that you would read an article in the paper that I was some type of hero. I'm not saying that I should be, but I'm just making a comparison and how well my career went. And the amount of complaints I received from the Civilian Complaint Review Board were very few. They were kind of sporadic. It was a byproduct of doing intrusive police work. I did self-initiated police work my entire career. But 2018 to 2022, I got 75% of the majority of my complaints.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Happy Monday. That's assuming you're listening to it on the Monday when it comes out. If you're not, then happy whatever day it is. This episode is brought to you by Trident Coffee, the veteran-owned brand where every sip inspires you to live life full steam ahead. I've been drinking their coffees for a while now, and I'm glad to partner with a company whose products I use. At Trident, they're more than just coffee. They're storytellers. Crafted by veterans, their instant cold brew is perfect for those who serve, those who have served, and anyone who values wellness. Featuring natural ingredients like organic mushrooms, adaptogens, and nootropics, it's more than just a morning pick-me-up. It's your new wellness ritual. Enjoy it at home or on the go, wherever your day takes you. Trident Coffee isn't just about great-tasting coffee. It's about empowering you to be the healthiest version of yourself, because great veterans make great citizens. Try their instant cold brew today, along with many other coffee products, and taste the freedom of wellness. Remember, when you choose Trident, you're not just choosing coffee, you're choosing a path of connection through health and wellness. Head on over to tridentcoffee.com and use the promo code TDP15 for 15% off your order. Again, that's TDP15 for 15% off your order. My guest this time, if you can't already tell from his accent, he was born and raised in New York City. He started out adulthood as a reserve in the Marine Corps going to college. His plan was to commission and become a JAG officer. He deployed to Iraq in 2003, and when he got home, his dad convinced him that the NYPD would be a better option for him. And 18 years later, he retired as a lieutenant. Small caveat to that, though. He retired in 2022, and at that time, he had the most civilian complaints against him of all NYPD officers. Not something he's proud of, not something he's bragging about. And we're going to get into the specifics of the change over his career. Today, he's advocating for NYPD officers and how things can hopefully improve for them through the podcast, New York's Finest, Retired and Unfiltered, which he co-hosts. This was a fun conversation, and I know you're going to enjoy it. So let's get into it. Here's episode 147 with Eric Dim.
How long have you been doing jiu-jitsu? Now about 4.5 years, but I boxed many. I always did some martial arts. It's always been my passion. I did Krav Maga. I boxed for many years. I did jiu-jitsu. Just love it towards self-defense.
Stay close to that microphone for me.
Recorded now?
Yeah, we're going.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So beautiful.
I don't do. So for me, I don't do the thing. So tell me about yourself, because I think what it does is it puts people in a weird spot. So I'll do the introduction. Everybody will hear it without us talking. It's just us talking.
Super cool. Yeah. I like it. Kind of like Joe Rogan. Just go. Outstanding.
Aren't we all trying to be him? Aren't we all stealing everything that he's? You know, I mean, I always screw up that saying. Copying or whatever is the sincerest form of flattery. All of us are.
He's got the it factor.
He has set the roadmap, and every one of us, from the microphones we're using, you know, all of it. The thing that I think that has truly, where he's a game changer, is the long form conversation. Not having a time limit, not having an agenda. Well, I don't want to say not having an agenda, but not having a.
Don't we all?
I'm only going to ask these questions, and we're not going to deviate from these. Hey, if our conversation goes 5 hours, it goes 5 hours. If it goes 5 minutes, it goes 5 minutes. You know, and I think that's where he's really changed the game and given us all a great example of that's how you do it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He's number one, right? For good reason too. So,
and he's been in the game for what I want to say 2009. So when people say, "Oh, he's been at it and he's been plugging at it for a long time,"
well, look at his adversity, right? Pick any topic, he'll discuss it. I mean,
yes.
One day he's talking about mushrooms, one day they're talking about policing. So any topic, they discuss it. That's why I think it's awesome.
So you've been always involved in martial arts and in contact sports?
Just a passion, yeah. I've always been athletic. As a kid, I played basketball. I mean, I played for all different organizations, playing ball. I was living in Brooklyn as a kid. I went all over playing basketball. I played CYO ball. I played for JCC. I played for the Housing Authority. So I remember I played for the Housing Authority. I lied to my father. I said, I'm going to go try out for the CYO team. I actually went to play with the kids from the projects. And I was 13 at the time. But they actually put me on the 15-year-old team. So I was doing well. So I was always athletic,
What was it like actually being down in Brazil and training jiu-jitsu and competing?
Oh, it was great. I had a great time. I spent 3 months in Brazil.
Did you set up somebody to go hang out with before you went, or did you just literally show up with your bag and a gi and go?
No, I went with my wife and I went with my family, and we're traveling, and that's been part of my experience in retirement. We're traveling, and then part of that is also training. So while I'm traveling, it grounds me. So usually I find my hotels and where I'm going to stay by the jiu-jitsu place. I look for the jiu-jitsu gym, and then that's where I ground myself, where I'm going to stay and travel the area, and I train.
How long were you there?
3 months.
How'd you find it? Were you accepted pretty much?
Oh, awesome. Unbelievable. Brazil was great. I had a great time. It was really cool.
Where were you training back home?
I was training in New York. And then once I retired...
No, where'd you start at? I was
training at Igor Gracie in New York.
Okay.
So I started training there. And then when I retired, I started traveling. I bought an RV. I remember I told my wife, I said, listen, I'm retiring.
What every New Yorker decides to do is go driving.
I was like, listen, house or a boat? Just kidding around. She's like, really? I said, let's do an RV. So sure enough, we sold our house. We bought an RV, started traveling, hit the road. And then I was going place to place. And I was training at one jiu-jitsu spot in one area. And then I would go to, I was in South Carolina. I was training one day at one gym. And then I went to in Georgia. And then I went in Florida. I went all around. And it's great. You meet the finest people. You meet the nicest people that train jiu-jitsu. And I met a lot of cops with it throughout the country. And I was talking to them since I'm doing my own podcast. It was great. Honestly, awesome.
I'm actually jealous of, that, just because that's the one thing I tell people is when you get into jiu-jitsu, it really is a community. It's a family.
It sure is.
And I've yet to reach out to a studio. Hey, I'm going to be traveling. You mind if I... Sure, come on in, And some of them have some restrictions as far as gi color or whatever it's going to be. But for the most part, you are welcome. And once you get on the mat, everybody's exactly the same for the most part.
Awesome.
I mean, in the sense that it's just you and me. Let's go.
I only wish I started earlier. But I think also I will say this. Since I started later in life doing jiu-jitsu, I did other types of martial arts and boxing and stuff I love. But starting jiu-jitsu later on in life really made me appreciate it even more. It's fascinating. The first time you do jiu-jitsu, I don't care who you are, how athletic. I've seen guys that are monsters doing CrossFit. You just get mollywopped by some guy that's 150 pounds, 160 pounds, and there's two roads to take when you do it. One, you say, listen, because you have too much of an ego, I'm never doing this again. Or like myself, he's like, you know what? This is intriguing. I want to come back. I want to figure this out. And it's a mind game. It's more mentally exhausting than actually physically exhausting. And that's what's so intriguing about jiu-jitsu is you can't get bored of it. Every time you train, you learn something new. It's problem solving. It's fascinating. I only wish I would have done it earlier in my career because I do think it helps in law enforcement. But at the same token, I am excited. I did it late in life. Because it made me appreciate it even more. It's fascinating. And you meet the finest people. I think about it. I trained in Brazil. I trained in Asia. And these are people I didn't know. And I trusted that, God forbid they have me in a submission move, that they're not going to break my arm. If I tap and say, listen, that's enough, they let me go. Or vice versa. So, there's bumps and bruises. I did a couple of podcasts where I had shine-ins, but I love it. It's really fascinating.
Did you find it significantly different between Brazil and Asia? Anything noticeably?
No, well, the training itself, it's the same style. It's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But in Brazil, there are a lot of black belts. I mean, everybody's a black belt. You hop into a cab, into an Uber, and the guy is driving, he's a black belt. It's impressive. I went to some of the schools there. I mean, it was the size of the studio. and you just have a great time. It's fun. I mean, it was like on the second floor. There was no air conditioning, and we're wrestling hard. You think like someone's gonna go through a window, but the guys were so cool. Afterwards, they have a couple of beers. They were really cool. I had an amazing time. And what's interesting about it is they spoke less English in Brazil than they did in Asia. So I was listening to them in Portuguese. I had no idea what they were saying, and I was just kind of following with the moves. I met cool guys. I still talk to some of those guys today. And I went a little bit over a year ago. Awesome time. Really cool.
And you were competing down there also?
I didn't compete in Brazil.
Oh.
I signed up for a competition, and they wouldn't let me. You needed some like green card passport. I couldn't get in time. So I competed in Malaysia. That was a good time. That was fun.
Do your family do jiu-jitsu too, or just you?
My wife does it. My son does it. So, a lot of my friends now that build a network that do it. I try to encourage most people to do it. I think it makes you a better person. I think it's even made me a better person later on in life. Not that I was a bad person, but I think I find it translates to life. It really does.
I think that one of the things that gets overlooked is that time on the mat, because it forces you to be so focused on just what you're doing right there. You already said it. I really do believe it is one of the best things for veterans and first responders because it allows us to completely, in a weird way, turn off everything else except jiu-jitsu for that moment. And you're not thinking about home. You're not thinking about work. You're not thinking, you are only in that moment right there thinking about jiu-jitsu.
It's fascinating, right? Because I've trained in a boxing gym, in a fight gym in Westchester for a couple of years. And I've trained in doing jiu-jitsu, and I did Krav Maga. And what's interesting is in martial arts, I find that you're learning violence, you're learning how to fight, but I've never seen a fight in any of these gyms. It just doesn't happen. It's because you get that primal aggression out. You're training. It's another day. And I really think that people would have less altercations in real life if they partook in some type of martial art. It doesn't matter which one, whichever one you like. There's no reason to fight now. You got all your primal aggression out, and also if you're out in the street and you have a confrontation with someone, you can make that choice to walk away because you're confident. You train every day. You don't have to ask yourself those questions of how you'd handle yourself. You already know. Just to say that when you go into a jiu-jitsu gym, there's belts, but really you don't need the belt because the pecking order exposes itself right away. You already know who's the top dog, there's the hierarchy built itself. So you already know, and there's a respect amongst each other. I think everyone should partake in something with boxing, judo, whatever you like.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head too, that when it carries itself outside the gym, because you mentioned you could be the biggest, strongest guy in the world, and the little guy who's 150 pounds is going to turn you into a pretzel. Yeah. And what you realize is where a lot of us, and I'll even put myself in this, we go through life and we misjudge people because we think, oh, I'm bigger than, and that's the worst situation you could be in because you have no idea what that other person knows or is capable of.
So true. It's funny to say that because I'm going to a gym now in Los Angeles. And there's this guy. I mean, if you saw him walking on the street, you would say this guy looks like a straight up hippie. He's kind of thin, looks scrawny, has long hair, but he's talented. Let me tell you. You roll with him, and you find out real quick. He humbles you real quick.
You can muscle out of some things, but there's some technique where they're gonna expect you to muscle out, and they're gonna put you in just the right place, and you're just like, whoa, wait a minute, how'd I get here?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's what makes me go back. Like, what? I got to figure this out. Rather than, and I think that is what is troubling for cops. For many cops, I have found that most cops, they don't come back to jiu-jitsu for that reason, because the reality sets in like, wow, what actually could happen to me. Not knowing what you could do on the ground, it's dominating. And what's interesting, right? You hear a lot of people say, and it's true, you don't want to be on the ground when you're fighting as a cop. That's absolutely true. But how do you keep yourself on your feet? You have to know what the ground is. You have to know what those deep waters are so that you don't end up on the ground, so you can defend yourself to stay on your feet. It's like if you're competing and you're a striker, in order to actually expose those skills, you need to stay on your feet. So you need to know the groundwork so you can stay on your feet. And vice versa. You need to understand what's going on the ground. So if you do go to the ground, how do you get back up? So it's quite interesting because I've heard that argument. So
And I think back on my time in law enforcement, I can't think of a fight that didn't end up on the ground. Rarely do they stay on, because the thing is fortunately for us, we encounter a very small percentage who actually know how to fight. They're in that thing of, that old adage, I see red when so as long as you can withstand the first 30 seconds or so, you're good. But more often than not, they're going to try to grab you up and they're going to try to get you on the ground, because I think that's, at the end of the day, it's our human instinct. Is wrestling and grappling that's why I say it's great for kids. Jiu-Jitsu is great for kids because you're not trying to teach them katas and I got to stand. It's get on the ground and just keep control of the person who's across from you.
It's natural too. Look, we were meant to wrestle. Our bodies were not designed to punch. With these small little knuckles, as best as you can, they break. Listen, I broke almost every finger fighting on the streets. I ran a gun unit. It's just a byproduct of doing that type of work, and it wasn't because I was looking for a fight. That's what I wanted. I don't want broken fingers, but it's the reality. It's the byproduct of getting these type of arrests, getting illegal firearms off the street. That's the adversity you're facing. So
let's take it all the way back. People can hear by your accent. So you're from Colorado, right?
Yeah, the Brooklyn version.
So obviously from New York, but talk to me about as a young kid growing up. Whereabouts in New York?
Well, I grew up in Brooklyn and Staten Island. So I actually lived in 4 boroughs, even as an adult. I lived in the Bronx. I lived in Queens. The only one I didn't live in was Manhattan, obviously, because it's too expensive. But I grew up mostly in Brooklyn and Staten Island.
And for you, well, your family-wise, big family, brothers, sisters?
Sure. Brother, sister, all New York City kids.
Youngest? Were you the youngest?
I'm the youngest of 3.
Were you a good kid, troublemaker, kind of getting into things?
I think I was a good kid. I mean, I grew up in a rough area, but I was a good kid. I was into sports. I was always into playing basketball. Of course, I was mischievous too as a kid, but I was never involved in anything that was criminal. Was never involved in any gang life. I figured I was a tough New York City kid. I was on the streets playing basketball. I got into fist fights as a kid, in parks playing ball, things like that, school related. But I wasn't a bad kid. Absolutely not.
I tell people a lot what I think is different today for most part, or at least from what I'm exposed to on the West Coast. I don't know how it is in New York City today. One of the things I think is different is kids aren't out on the street just playing anymore. You learn real quick growing up because you might be playing basketball with a kid who's 2-3 years older than you, 2-3 years younger than you, but you learn your mouth is going to get you into trouble. And there's repercussions for saying the wrong thing. And it's just a part of growing up and learning how to interact with other people.
Oh, I can't agree with you more. I see it with my own kids. Same thing. They're on the iPad, and I might be part to blame for that also, right? Because I give them the iPad. But at the same token, the world has evolved. It's different. They're playing all kinds of games. That's how they interact with other kids through these they're gamers on the iPad. But it was different. I agree with you. When we were kids, my mother didn't know where I was. I was out all day. I was on my bicycle. I rode my bike everywhere. I was on rollerblades. I used to cut school in high school. We would cut school. We would go on rollerblades and jump on the ferry. So in New York, you get on the Staten Island ferry and we'd go to Manhattan. We'd spend the whole day on rollerblades. I don't know why we were fascinated. We'd go to Canal Street in Chinatown in Manhattan and we'd watch the guys play 3-card Monte and we'd try to pick out who the scammers were. That guy's in on it. So it was a good time. But I think that there was definitely more respect amongst each other for that reason that you just meant. Because there was actions and consequences, right?
Yes.
And I think that's important to have. And that's why we talk about, it's interesting, we talk about on the podcast that I have with John McCarrier, the podcast that we have, New York's Finest Retired Unfiltered. We talk about masculinity, and we're losing that. They're emasculating this country right now. And as kids, masculine men keep each other in line. We have, it's that aggressive control because there's respect. You understand that if you're out of line, there's another man that's going to check you. And you learn that as a kid, right? And that's where I think kids are missing the mark now on social media. There are actions, but there's no consequences. The things that they say is not real life. We wouldn't say those things when we were kids because the consequence. You could get punched in the face, right?
And we didn't have the luxury of being able to say it from behind a keyboard. You may have said it behind somebody's back, but guess what? It's going to get back to them, and it's going to get back to them real quick.
And the irony of that also, I do believe that the time now is far more violent than it was then, even though I do believe that we had more physical altercations. And I think that and I think the reason why I think it's more violent now is this buildup. You see these kids right now, they'll have interactions through social media, and it builds up over time. And then finally, when there's some confrontation, at least to a firearm, it's all built up. It's compressed emotions, and they don't understand how to emotionally detach because they didn't get into that fist fight. What happens when you're a kid? You get to a fist fight with another kid, and what happens?
30 minutes later, you're friends again.
That's your best friend.
Yep.
Right? Because it's primal. It's almost like a contact sport. When you fight with another kid, no one really gets that injured. A couple of bumps and bruises, right? And then you're friends. We don't have that anymore. That we get that primal aggression out of the way. But the kids now on social media, they don't have that outlet. So I think that's where the mental health today is far more egregious than it is when we were growing up.
Well, and it didn't do you any good to hold any grudges, because guess who the group's going to be at the ballpark tomorrow? It's the same group of people.
Oh, yeah.
You know? And tomorrow, that guy and that guy are going to be beefing. And you guys are going to be sitting back watching, laughing at them.
And then you laugh like these idiots.
It's right? Just a circle. It's just a circle. And I think that, for me, that's one of the biggest things I look at kids today is they're just not learning that aspect. There's no parents around. There's nobody going, guys, knock it up. You know, half the group would be turning their back like, hey, go deal with your shit and let us know when you're done. You know?
Oh, yeah. And you understood respect back then. Growing up, you knew, okay, listen, you have to respect these other kids because you may get into another fist fight, right? You might not want to, so it gets tiring after a while.
Mom and Dad, what'd your mom and dad do for work?
My father, may rest his soul, I lost him during COVID.
I'm sorry to hear.
No, he was an accountant for many years. And my mother, she was a makeup artist. And she sang in a band.
Oh,
quite interesting.
Did any of you or your brothers or sisters, as far as musical talent, get any of that?
I can't sing a note. No way. I try. I think I'm okay. I can say one Frank Sinatra. That's about it.
Aren't you required to from New York?
Yeah. My way. That's about it.
For your family, as far as generational, you mentioned you grew up basically all over except Manhattan.
Yeah.
But did big family, extended family in the area?
Sure. My family, they were all diehard New Yorkers, all diehard blue-collar workers, all diehard veterans. I come from a deity of veterans. My father was a Vietnam veteran. One of my cousins, he was on the police force after me. Another cousin of mine on the fire department. My uncle was a sanitation. All New York City blue-collar workers. Except my father, he was an accountant, but he told me, listen, don't go for private industry, work for the city. That was the theory back then. Work for the city, get a nice pension. That was the nomen.
On my family's side back in the city, it was all firemen. I've got 3 cousins that my uncle, son, and son. So 3 generations is what it meant.
I should have taken that job.
Firefighter.
I never wanted to.
Every cop says that. I should have been a fireman.
My cousin, I talk to him all the time. He's still on the fire department. And I would laugh. I say, isn't it funny? I'm looking at my phone. I got to figure out when I'm off. You got to figure out when you go to work. He's like, I'm on vacation. You're on vacation? When do you go back? He's like, a month. I'm like, a month? I thought you took a week. Yeah, but the way it works out, I'm like, oh, wow.
I front loaded. I work 7 days straight, and then I have the rest of the month off.
What a job! But you know what? That is a good brotherhood. It definitely, what I see from the fire department in New York, I'm sure other fire agencies throughout the country are probably the same, but definitely more similar to what I saw in the Marine Corps than in comparison to law enforcement. I see the parity.
And having granted, I was born in New York. I grew up here in California, so I do not. At heart, I believe I'm a New Yorker, but I'm not a New Yorker. But I've been able to see the two sides of it. And one of the things that I see between 30 years of law enforcement on the West Coast compared to the East Coast, because there's a lot more smaller agencies, once you get out west, you lose a little bit of it. So you see it more in the big East Coast agencies, and then you even see it more when you're talking about firefighters, especially on the East Coast.
You're talking about the camaraderie?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that, but from what I've seen here, it doesn't matter, agency to agency. Firefighters just, there's a different, I don't know what it is about fire that, because if you ask every fireman, they look at us like we're nuts. You're like, I'm not going to dodge bullets. screw that. And we tell them, I'm not going in a burning building.
Right.
But I do think that there's something about fire that really brings them together.
Well, I think it's the ambiance. When you're working in a fire department in comparison to law enforcement, right? Your first year as a fireman, you're in a firehouse. You're warm. These now become your brothers. And they, listen, you're kind of hazed in the sense like the first year, at least for New York City, you're cleaning the place. You're helping them make the food, right? Kind of keep your mouth shut until you make your way, right? Until they bring you into that culture, right? It's very tribal. And law enforcement is tribal also, but it's different in the sense that your first year, I'm not sure for the West Coast, but at least in New York City, your first year, you're walking a beat. You're on a foot post. Most of the time solo. You might have a partner down the block, but you're kind of solo. So you're not coming up in that brotherhood as much. You're not in a house. You're cold or you're hot. Different, where in the firemen, you're part of the culture. That's why I think I love Jiu-Jitsu so much. When you go to a Jiu-Jitsu school, it's the same way. You keep your mouth shut until they know you and they kind of bring you in. It's tribal. You got to follow their way of doing things, their culture, their community until they get to know you. And then, I think it's a good way to bring people in.
And again, I think you and I were showing our age because I think that's one of the other things that a lot of the younger generation doesn't want to do. They don't want to earn their bones.
I know. It's funny you say that, right? Because I was a special operations lieutenant. I was an anti-crime sergeant. So running teams, I would always have to interview guys and identify the prospects, who's coming up. I used to call it the farm, right? I'm looking at the minor leagues, who's coming up to bring to special operations. And you get kids straight out of the academy and like, what do I need to do to get to the team? I'm like, listen, why don't you first do police work first? And then let's talk. I mean, can we put the cart before the horse? So it's quite interesting. It's a different generation.
I remember at my first agency before I jumped ship and went to the second one, I was on our board, our police officer board. I remember going to the monthly luncheon with the chief and the captains just to talk about stuff that was going on. And I still remember one of the captains going, hey, one of the new guys came in and said that, they really don't think the shift sign up based on seniority is fair. What do you guys think about going on? And it's like, that's all we have. Our seniority is the few things that we have, and now you want to take that away. And what's funny is we're not talking 5 years ago. This was a conversation that we had. We're going on almost 20 years ago now. So it's just that wave has come, and I think that unfortunately there's a lot of younger men and women weren't raised with kind of learning, hey, you know your role, know your place. And I'm not saying that disrespectfully. It's just a matter of the cycle and the circle of life.
I agree. And I think it's good and it's bad also. In some way, I must admit, I envy this generation in the sense that I always believe now, not growing up and not throughout my tenure of the police department, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. Mm-hmm. Right? I always had the ideology. I was in the Marine Corps and I transitioned that to the police department. Keep your mouth shut. Never complain. If I got notified that I had to do some detail, if it was my wedding that weekend, I would have kept my mouth shut. I would have told my wife we got to cancel our wedding. Where the new generation would actually speak up and say, listen, I have something this weekend, I can't do it. So in some ways, if we could find a balance.
Yes.
Because I never spoke up. I kept my mouth shut because that was the belief, right? You keep your mouth shut, keep it moving. You show respect. And also you learned in the Marine Corps, and especially law enforcement also should transition that sometimes questioning authority could cost lives. And the same token, though, sometimes we have to question authority, especially now, because sometimes those in authority have compromised integrity, are not the most keen on morality, which they should be. So there has to be some balance.
And sometimes just because you're the one in charge doesn't mean you're making the right decision. And I don't mean for anything more than just you made a bad call. How many times have one of us gone, well, that was stupid. But the thing is that when you're a new guy, back in our day, you didn't say anything. And so I give credit to the younger men and women today because they have I don't want to say it's confidence. It's just they've been raised with it's okay to ask questions. And they come on the job and they're like, that doesn't look, what about this?
Yeah.
And I don't want to dissuade that because you talk about, starting out. I remember it wasn't this bad for me, but I've heard horror stories But I do remember times where you'd be like, hey, sit in the car because I'm going to go talk to some of the senior guys. It's like you're kind of banished. You're just the rookie who's in training. So just stay here sitting in the car. But there are some where it's like, hey, we're going to go in for lunch. You sit here in the car, keep writing your reports. So there is, I get it. You do have to earn their respect. But at the same token, it's not like I'm a 12-year-old. You don't need to treat me like a child.
No, I agree. And I think that it's, like I said, the aspect, I try to see the value in everything, right? Excuse me. Drink some water. But I try to see the value in everything, right? There is value when I see the younger generation, especially now. As I said, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. They ask questions. And I do think it's good to a point that they're willing to question authority, and I don't think it's a sense of courage. I think it's indoctrination. This is the way they're raised. But the problem is when we're overreaching and now they question everything. So are they questioning it because they're overzealous? Are they lazy, incompetent? Or are they doing it because they're actually keen and aware of their situation? If we could find balance, I think it's great. Because unfortunately, what I see now in law enforcement, and I'm very critical, particularly of the leadership of the New York City Police Department, and actually what I see, it mirrors other police departments throughout the country because of politics. I'm critical of the leadership. The rank and file throughout the entire nation is flawless and exemplary. Is there a margin of error? Do we have cops out there that are doing stupid stuff and really don't fit the bill? Absolutely. But ultimately, I put the blame on leadership. I think leadership is the most important thing for an organization to thrive, and it's also responsible when it crumbles. I think that's the most important aspect of policing. Absolutely.
Rarely will you ever see an entity, and maybe I'm stretching my opinion here, rarely will you see any type of entity, and I'm not just talking law enforcement, that implodes from the inside out. Usually, a deterioration within an organization starts with leadership. And whether it's they start allowing things that causes a change, whether there's just poor leadership across the board, but rarely can an entity from within that organization say, we're gonna be so divisive that we're gonna destroy it from the inside out. I just don't see that happening. I think that any organization without proper leadership is going to fail.
Absolutely. No bad troops, no bad leaders, right? But it's at every level.
Yes.
Right? I'm a firm believer. I learned in the Marine Corps. I transitioned from my life with everything. Small unit leadership breakdown. We have to have accountability, responsibility for ourselves, and then the person who's in charge of you, the buck has to stop with them. They have to be willing to say, I take ownership, responsibility for you and myself. The person who's in charge of that person and the person has to say, the buck stops with me. I take ownership and responsibility for me, you, and the person below. We don't see that in law enforcement. We see when there's something controversial and a cop is at the highlight of a controversial incident, the leadership does not take accountability and responsibility. Throughout the country, I have yet heard a leader in charge of a police department say, hey, we have made mistakes. We learned from it, and this is how we are moving forward. But they put blame on the cop as if the cop trained himself or herself. And there's numerous contributing factors that we've seen throughout law enforcement agencies that have attributed to the blame of a cop. There were signs throughout a person's career where we could have had a proper evaluation, where we could have steps mitigated to make someone better. That's what discipline should be corrective action. But unfortunately, we see discipline as punishment. And I think that's where we missed the mark.
There are so many different ways to go with this, because I think back, we've already talked about this, how you and I were most probably raised very similar. I didn't have the Marine Corps under me, but I came into law enforcement with the mindset that I'm the new guy. And if you're going to come talk to me, what's going to happen is my mouth is going to close and my ears are going to open. And sometimes as a boss, you just got to be able to do that. Hey, come here, let's just talk for a second. But unfortunately, I think nowadays, the younger generation looks at it, if the boss is just coming to talk to you, that's a punishment. No, it's just them talking to you. Maybe they see a path you're going down. Hey, let's get you off that path. So it is a yin and a yang. It's Good leaders need to be, they need to remember that they're just a person. And sometimes corrective action is just talking to somebody. Hey, this isn't official. This is just you and me talking. This is what I'm seeing. You might want to do a different whatever. Now, if they continue, hey, I gave you the opportunity, but at the same token, the other side has to be, no problem, boss. I won't do that again. You know?
Communication.
Yes.
Communication breaks barriers, right? If you're in a relationship, communication is so important. When you're a boss, and I say you're a leader, and there's a huge difference, and I hope, if there's people out there right now in leadership positions in law enforcement, if they're watching this podcast, I hope they listen to this, because this is, I find, the most important thing. If you're in a leadership position, leaders lead people. If you want to be a manager, managers manage things. And I believe in law enforcement, we lead people. So you have to have communication. Communication breaks barriers. It's a relationship. You are a supervisor, you have a team, a unit, a command, whatever the case is. You are in a relationship. And you have to treat these people fairly and communicate with them. And if they have faults and you are afraid to tell them their faults, that fear, you're hurting them. You need to have that communication. You need to tell them the truth. And what happens? Most people are afraid of telling the truth. And, you're afraid to tell Officer Smith, listen, I don't like the way you operate. You don't look good today. You know what? You need to communicate with them. But instead, if they're habitually late, right, and you never say something, then how do they know there's something wrong? And then 6 months, someone's habitually late, and then all of a sudden, your captain, or whatever the case is, your management tells you they have an issue with this person always be late. And now you write them up after 6 months, but you never had a conversation with them. Who's wrong? Right? You allowed it. You enabled it.
That was one of the things for me that I really took as I promoted up very seriously. The first time somebody shouldn't hear, or the first time someone hears about a problem they're having, should not be on their annual evaluation.
Yeah.
It shouldn't come as a shock to them, but that, I think, is one of the big detriments to a lot of people who promote, is they're afraid to have those crucial conversations.
I could do a whole episode on a whole podcast. We go down that rabbit hole talking about evaluations. All right, that used to drive me crazy. Where, I would speak to some of my sergeants and say, "Wait a minute, how our rating was a 1 to 5. 5 is like you're amazing. You need actually commander's approval to get a 5. It was the other problem was the evaluation system. It was numbers that were kind of box someone in. So it would go from 2 to 2.5 to 3 to 3.5 to 4 to 4.5 to 5. So you might be fantastic or amazing or 4.5, and someone else is just a little bit under you. But if I put them at a 3.5, it doesn't evaluate them properly. There's not much room, So I think it's kind of unfair. But at the same token, if you're an outstanding cop and you could be relied on, you do great with the public, you have a great eye for police work, and I rate you a 4.5. And if someone else is constantly late and doesn't have the same work ethic, but I rate that person a 4.5 also, I just did you an injustice. And that was the biggest flaw. It's too subjective.
Yeah. Let's get back to you, though. So
Sure.
You've mentioned the Marine Corps. Coming out of high school, was the Marine Corps your only goal, or did you ever think about college? You talked about you played sports. Was sports after high school an option?
So I went to college for a year first. I just couldn't get into it. I was always was intellectual. I like to read. But I just couldn't get focused. I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. I had this drive to go to the Marine Corps, but I was kind of like having this battle with myself if I was going to actually go into the Marine Corps. But eventually, I just pulled the trigger after a year. I couldn't get focused, and that really changed my life and got me focused. And I believe that college was great. I ended up getting my degree, but I feel that my education life has actually been self-taught and self-initiated. And I choose the books I want. I choose the subject that I'm interested in, and I feel that leaders are readers, and that's the way to go. Just keep reading. You want to learn? Read books. Pick something, read it.
How young were you when you decided on the Marine Corps or the military in general?
Oh, as far as second grade, I remember pictures on Halloween. I remember having pictures with other kids. I still have them to this day, all cammied up, playing with fake guns. That was, I always wanted to be in the military. I think I liked that structure. My father was in the military. My great uncles were in Pearl Harbor. So, as I said, it was definitely a deity.
Was your mom and dad pushing the military?
No, not at all. Not at all. If anything, they would probably just like, hey, not even talking about it. They weren't against it, but they weren't trying to promote it either. So,
what year did you graduate high school?
98.
And when did you go? You said you did a year in college. Mm-hmm. What did you start studying?
I started studying right away. As soon as
what degree? What were you leaning towards as far as a degree?
Well, I wanted to be a lawyer initially. That was my goal. I was like, I figured if I go into the military, I'd be a JAG officer. So I ended up getting a bachelor's in history. But I started studying right away. My focus was on history. I ended up going with that.
And as far as going in the Marine Corps, what year did you go?
99. And
was that
right after the first year? We're right in.
The process for that, did you consider any of the other branches?
No.
So
it's funny you said that. I said there's two types of kids, right? There's one that wants to go to the military, goes to all the recruiting offices and sees their options. I just wanted to be a Marine. I didn't care if they pay you. I didn't even care what the job was. I was like, I just want to be a Marine. The guy's like, what do you want to do? I was like, I don't know. I think he had it was a picture of trucks. I'm like, I'll do that. I'll drive trucks. I don't care. I don't care.
You're a recruiter's dream.
Yeah, I was like, whatever. He showed me a video. I'm like, okay, dude, I'm in. I want to do all that. I think I was an adrenaline junkie. All right, I'm in. That's good. I didn't care what the other branches do.
The fact that you just walked, you're like, I don't care. We're not gonna side.
I've always been like that. I'm like, I don't care. Just and then after, so what happened was, I signed up for the reserves because initially I was going to go active, but I had spoken to someone about the officer program. So initially I was going to go into OCS first. But then other people told me that you get more respect if you go enlisted first, and then you go to the officer op. So that's why I went to reserves. I signed up for the reserves. I went enlisted. So as soon as I was done with boot camp, combat training in school, I went right to OCS.
Where'd you go to OCS at?
Chronicle.
And
I went honor grad, actually.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah. I never took the commission.
Why not?
We went to Iraq in 2003. I was there for almost a year. When I got back, the police department had called me, and I'm like, oh, what do I do now? It was kind of like, now I had a dilemma. So the test is good for 5 years, and I took it in 99. It was about to expire. So my father, we were talking, was like, you know what? You already served your country. He's like, why don't you try this? And he's like, it would be great to have a cop in a family. It's like, no one was ever a cop in my family. We was, like I said, it was city workers, but no one was actually a cop. My cousin actually came after me. So I was like, all right, you know what? Why not?
Paris Island?
Yeah, I went to Paris Island.
What was that experience like once you got there and kind of got into it?
Oh, my God. That's the most amazing. You never forget it. Never. I still remember getting my footprints, getting off the bus. I mean, you still remember that. It's amazing. You never.
Was it everything? Did it turn out to be everything you wanted it to be?
Oh, it was phenomenal. It was unbelievable. I think, you learn a lot about yourself at that age, like how resilient you are. At the same time, not as tough as you thought you were, When you go in the Marine Corps, I thought that, I was a 19-year-old New York City kid. I'm like, these guys can't break me, Physically, I knew, like, obviously, I met my challenge, but mentally, I said, they can't break me. I'm not going to get brainwashed. Well, didn't last very long, When I came home, I was sitting upright and had that 1,000-yard stare, but I thought it was amazing. I really did. I just, meeting kids from all over the country that, and I grew up, I was a New York City kid, Jewish, and some of these kids never met a Jewish kid in their entire life. Well, I remember one kid, I'm not kidding. He's like, oh, I thought you guys had horns. It's like, well, pretty funny. So, and then it's just a brotherhood. You learn that, all this propaganda about racism and different ethnicities, it's all nonsense because you just become brothers. Your family right away. I just had a reunion in January 2000, right before COVID hit, with a bunch of guys I was in boot camp with. And it was like we were back in boot camp, 20 years later. It was amazing.
So where were you on 9/11?
I was actually, it's funny to say, I was activated and I was doing recruiting. I got lucky. I was doing recruiting. I was in Staten Island and I was on the opposite side of Manhattan where the ferry is. So you could have a direct sight to the World Trade Center. So I saw it all happening. And I was in my my little recruiting uniform. And I remember the recruiter back then saying, well, something's going on. You know.
What was the immediate impact on your unit?
Oh, sure. I was with a communications unit. It was a reserve unit in Brooklyn. Great unit. Really, really cool. And
sorry, I'm only laughing because I'm thinking a communications unit with a bunch of guys with a Brooklyn accent.
It's communication.
What the hell did he say?
What? Yeah, it's actually pretty funny. So, but it's a huge unit and it has a long history of serving in every combat theater that throughout our entire history. Because the Marine Corps is such a small entity. It really relies on the reserve unit. The reserve unit actually plays a huge role, especially in Operation Iraqi Freedom. Most of the guys that were overseas were actually reserves, which I think is actually essential and is a great resource because most of the guys that you had serving were, like myself, you had guys that were cops and Marines, firefighters and Marines. You had guys that were Con Ed workers and Marines. So they had all these resources and tools to do their job overseas also. I think the reserves is fantastic. It really is impressive. But
as far as, I guess, deployment or action, did anything really change for you guys right away?
What do you mean?
Like right after 9/11, did you immediately get activated to active service?
Shortly after, yes, it did. So I didn't immediately go to Iraq, but I went to Hawaii for a couple months. I was getting some equipment ready. I did some stuff in North Carolina. I did recruiting. So I was being utilized. And I got the anthrax shot. So we knew it was coming.
Any part of that spin up make you want to do it more, want to do it less, consider? Because at that point, you were still thinking of taking a commission as an officer, right?
Yes, that was my plan. I wanted to be a JAG officer. I had already finished OCS. I already finished trade. I was honor grad. I went to the platoon leader course.
So were you just waiting to finish college before you got commissioned?
Mm-hmm.
And you ended up actually going to Iraq in 2003?
January 2003, yep.
And how long were you there?
About 8 months.
Coming back home from that, I know you said that your dad kind of pushed, hey, NYPD kind of deal. But what were you thinking when you came back home? Were you still on track to say, no, this is my career?
Yes. I still wanted to do it. I still wanted to be an officer. I saw all the officers that I served with in Iraq. So, they were in charge and they, some of them had 100, 200 men under them. So that's what I wanted to do. I really was excited. I remember I had the books from Brooklyn Law School sitting on my desk. So that was my plan. But sure enough, your plans change, you never know.
So what year did you end up in the academy?
January 2004. So it was like right away. I just,
So there was really kind of, I'll say no break in service. You basically came home from Iraq and went straight back in.
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much. I kind of made that transition, so.
With a lot of guys probably coming back from the first Gulf Wars, were there a lot of veterans in your academy class?
There was a good mix. It was a decent amount. Not as many as I thought there would be, but there was a decent amount, sure.
Did you get pulled on because of your military experience to kind of be I know in my going through the academy myself, man, they pull the military guys to be the class sergeants early on.
Yes.
Because you at least know the basics of what they want you to do. Get these guys from A to B.
Well, yeah, so sure. They don't call it a platoon, they called it a company in the police academy. And so they nominated me to be the company sergeant. So they do ask who's military, who has military service, who has service as a cadet. And then they decide who they want to be the company sergeant. So I actually was nominated, lost a couple of friends over. I didn't care. I was like, listen, dude, you want it? Take it. I was in Iraq for almost a year. I want a break, but I took that responsibility.
Our first class sergeant was a major in the Marine Corps. He was processing out, basically had done 20 and was processing out. I mean, and they put him as class sergeant the first day. It's like they all obviously knew his background, and they tried to screw with him, and it just rolled off his back.
Oh.
Like,
must be like, listen, you guys like me for breakfast, right?
Yeah.
So, that's interesting. But I had a good time. I was excited by it, the transition, but at the same time, I was disappointed also. I expected the transition. I figured New York City Police Department, I expected it to be like the Marine Corps, but it wasn't. It wasn't.
A little bit to be desired.
Well, you know, I saw
in the structure of the training, or just kind of just the laxness.
Well, the amount of nepotism that I saw,
okay,
in comparison to the Marine Corps, was just so obvious, and it really changed the ideology I had, my vision of this type of organization. But at the same time, okay, listen, I'll just roll with it. But I immediately saw that infectious nepotism that I didn't see in the Marine Corps.
Coming out of the academy, what did you want to do as far as your law enforcement career?
That's interesting you say that. All I wanted to do was just go out and get bad guys. You know, I didn't care. I had no idea about what kind of units the police department has. I really didn't know what a detective does. I didn't know anything about the police.
Did you do much, and I don't mean this sarcastically, did you do much research on the NYPD before you? No.
No, I have to admit I didn't. Not at all. It was kind of, I remember to this day, I was in college, and my father would do private security, and he would get me gigs to make extra money. So we were doing private security at Madison Square Garden, and there was this old beat cop would walk, and he would, I still remember, he had a brown wooden bogo, and he's flipping around, and he would always chat with my father. He liked my father, and this was 99. So he's like, listen, get my kid an application. So back then it was like $35, whatever. So I was like, I had zero interest in the police force. Zero. It just never was on my radar. He's like, just take the test. All right. I took the test. So again, just was on my radar. Didn't do any research. I never saw myself as a cop. I don't know why. Even though I was interested in law school, I never had any interest in law enforcement. So sure enough.
So you hit the street, and you're how old at this point when you hit the road as a cop?
24.
And where I'm going with this, so you grew up in the city, and if you talk to most cops, at least out here where I grew up, came up on the West Coast, a lot of them wouldn't have wanted to work in the same city where they went to high school and had all their friends and all that kind of stuff. And actually, I would say that's probably something that you want to try to maybe avoid. Just, go work somewhere else where you didn't grow up. Where did you want to work in the city?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, right? It's a different dynamic, I think, because New York City is such a metropolis and it's so saturated, but yet it's so diverse, right? And New York City is kind of like the block game, right? So I can see the comparison. If you're up here in the West Coast where it's more spaced out, maybe it's more suburban type of, even in a metropolis, it's just different than New York City. New York City is so dense and consolidated into a small area. You probably in the West Coast, you probably know most of the people. You've probably been to stores where you interact with people. But in New York City, you can live on Avenue A in Manhattan and not know anybody on Avenue B.
Got it.
It's a world away. It's 1 block away in distance, but it's a world away. And
Got it.
In New York City, 1 block could change the whole ambiance, the whole nomenclature of the entire look of that part of the city. So,
well, and not to go down any type of, people would potentially say it's racist, but that's one of the things that I love about the city is there's still neighborhoods that are predominantly a given ethnic group.
Oh, New York City is that 100% that way.
And I there's a part of me that loves it because the thing is that it's a way for you to go into a culture and get the whole culture.
It's almost like having a passport but not needing a passport.
Yes.
Right? And LA has that, right? If you want to go to Thailand, you can go to Little Thai. Right? You could go to
but you've got to drive to it. You're not
right. But you can go to Koreatown, you go to Little Thai, and New York City is that way. You could be on one street and it's all Italian. You want Italian food, you want to hear people speaking Italian. You turn the corner and you're in an African neighborhood and whatever you want, it's there. there's variety. So, but there could be there's plenty of kids I've met before who live 2 blocks away. You never even meet them. Like, get out of here! You live up the block. You meet somebody in the police department. Like, where'd you grow up? 2 blocks from you. Like, get out of here! So it's interesting. So I lived majority of my I would say the years growing up in an area called Stapleton in Staten Island. It's a rough area. It's predominantly African American. It's a rough area. It's rough and tumble, but I loved it too at the same time. I played basketball there. And I ended up working in the same area. And I actually picked it as a company sergeant in the police department in the academy. That's one of the agreements. If you're the company sergeant, you get to pick where you want to work. So I chose that. I chose to work there.
When you hit the road, where was the, where was the wish list that most of the young recruits are like, oh, I want to go to that station house?
Well, I would say most guys like, why do you want to work there? They would pick they call it hook houses, somewhere where you're not going to face as much adversity. So I said, no, I want the action. So
how soon into your career was promoting an interest to you?
Oh, right away. Absolutely. Just because of my competitive nature, I was fortunate. So you have to have a minimum of 3 years on the job to take the sergeant's test, and then you have to have 5 years to actually get your promotion. So it wasn't something like, I have to get promoted, but if the opportunity arose, I would take it. So sure enough, I got lucky, 3 years hit. I had an opportunity to take the test. And what was great was I really didn't have to study that hard. And because I always read, I was constantly reading anyway. So when the time came to take the test, I didn't feel like I had to study as hard as some of the other guys because I was already reading it. I still had to study. I still put the effort into it. And then sure enough, I did well. I would have been the first class, but I wasn't eligible. So I had to wait 2 years. And then sure enough, year 5 came and I got promoted.
For most of your peers, and I'll even go more towards the older guys, did you get people supportive of you that you wanted to promote early, or were you getting them more of a pushback, like, what are you promoting for?
You get both. You definitely get both. It was quite interesting too. I got a good story if you don't mind telling you.
Please.
So sure enough, year 5 comes, right? It was January 2009. When January 2004, January 2009, my test was already absolved. They were already promoting off the successor test. But they had to promote me because I was number 69 on the list, so I was supposed to be promoted first class. So I went into the they call it BMOC is the acronym, Basic Module Officer Course.
Just real quick, I want to ask.
Sure.
So when you pass and make the list, regardless of your number, that list has an expiration date?
Yes. The civil service exams are good for 5 years.
And so what I'm getting at is for promotions, you were saying they had to promote you because you were on the list?
Well, because I was supposed to be promoted the first class, which was shortly after I took the exam, but because I didn't have the time and rank,
got it.
I couldn't get the promotion.
Got it. Okay.
So sure enough, when I was eligible, they put me in. So, but the funny part was, so we're at the course. It's a month long. So of course, I always had dumb luck. Well, bad luck. My career was full of roller coasters, but I was always very easygoing. That was always my way. Like, listen, whatever, I'll roll with it. So halfway through our training, the deputy commissioner of management budget, he comes to the course and says, listen, sorry, due to budget cuts, we can't promote you. You'll finish the course, but we can't promote you. So I look around, and you can see there's some sad faces because they gave the fuck yous. Excuse my language, they already burned their bridges. I said, oh, not good, huh? Thank God I didn't. So sure enough, we finished the course. I went back to my old precinct, but now I'm supposed to be a sergeant. I got abused. Oh, man, I got abused already. One of the sergeants, my buddy, this guy, Mike Miller, nice guy. He goes, come here, kid. He puts me on the desk. He gives me his shield. Yeah, put this on. And then they made a name tape. You know how you have to have your name? They put almost sergeant. He goes, I'm going upstairs, go to sleep. They put me on they were laughing. And then when I went back to my locker, I had corporal chevrons glued to my locker. Oh, man. That month, I got ripped apart. We didn't know when we would get promoted. So sure enough, 5 weeks later came, and it was just like, all right, I'm going to promote you in 2 days. And then it was off to the races.
So as a new sergeant with 5 years on,
yeah,
is that within the NYPD, are you looked at as like, he don't know anything? Or do you get a good amount of respect just because of the rank?
It's a challenge. It's a tough challenge, especially with 5 years on the job and you're a sergeant. It's tough because you have some cops that worked for me with 20 years on the job. So you have to find balance. You have to be extremely humble. At the same time, you have to let them know that there's boundaries. Like, yes, I respect your time on the job and your experience, but this is a new job, and there's a dichotomy, and you have to respect that. And I found I did well with that challenge. I think the experience I had with the Marine Corps really helped me transition. So within a few months, they actually, I was appointed as anti-crime sergeant, which was in plainclothes. So I was excited, and I had the best cops on my team. One guy had 19 years on, one guy had 14 years on. So I felt I was fortunate. Wow, these guys get to teach me. So it was awesome.
So does every precinct have an anti-crime unit?
Back then, now it got disbanded, of course, because of George Floyd. June 15, 2020, that was the death of anti-crime. So now they have a quasi-anti-crime. They're in uniform, these different kind of uniforms, but he disbanded it. But back then, every precinct had one.
And so for you, were you a sergeant back at the same precinct house, or do they force you to become a new sergeant in a new precinct house?
After you talking about when I passed the test?
When you actually got promoted to...
Sure, you have to actually leave the borough. That's the rule. So I was working Staten Island in the 120 precinct, and then I had to leave the borough. And then I became a sergeant, and I went to what's called PSA 4. Stands for Police Service Area, which covers the housing projects in the Lower East Side of Manhattan.
How'd you like that time?
Oh, I loved it. It was awesome. Awesome. Working the Lower East Side that's an amazing place to work because it's such an interesting, it's the craziest world, right? You could be on Avenue D and 6th Street, which is like the main thoroughfare in the Lower East Side for housing. I mean, and there'd just be like gangs and drug dealers, and then on the same corner there'll be some millionaire going to work, in a full suit, and then, just a couple crazy protesters at the same time. It's just wild, all on the same corner living. That was an amazing experience.
How soon in your career did you put in place an actual mentor for you? Kind of, did you have an official mentor in the sense that somebody you actually really kind of hooked up with and go like, hey, I need you to guide me? Or did you just kind of pull from people you worked with?
I pulled from people I worked with. I even found that some of my mentors, they don't know it, were guys below me. Because the way they carry themselves, their experience. I felt that the Marine Corps itself was a mentor for me, transition to the police department. Some of the people that I worked for, the lieutenant that I had when I became an anti-crime sergeant, he had years of experience, very humble guy, very passive, but super assertive and smart, very intelligent. That whole ideology of walk softly, carry a big stick, he really embodied that. And I learned a lot from that. And I really picked from different people of what I liked. And kind of, at some point, you form your own style. Mm-hmm. But I really think I was blessed. I think that's the part where I love to pass on to people that are in new leadership positions. You have to say to yourself, okay, well, I'm in charge of 5 guys, 10 guys. Well, that's 5 attributes that you get to choose from in comparison that they have 1 to pick from you. So you benefit as a leader if you're willing to be humble to say, hey, that guy has something to offer, right? And that's what you have to look at. That's why I love this small book called How Successful People Win. It's literally this big, by John Maxwell. I don't know if you read it, by John Maxwell. It's such a great book because it talks about learning from different people, learning something every day, even from people that know less than you, because they may know something that you don't. So you got to find that value in that.
Well, it's something equally, I think, as important as a leader. You mentioned, so you've got 5 subordinates, And you, from them or from their perspective, they only get one you. You get to pick from 5 different attributes that they offer.
Absolutely.
But to the flip side of that, you also have to learn and grow as a leader to be able to talk to this person the way they need to be talked to, this person, because you can't just have one style that's going to resonate with all 5 of them.
Absolutely. Well said. I totally agree. I say this. There are some born leaders. There are some outliers. But I think that leadership as a whole is a learned skill. And I do believe that anybody that doesn't believe that leadership is a skill that you learn over time and experience is fooling themselves. You know, there's ideology sometimes where you get fantastic cops. They're so good at what they do, and they really have the trouble transitioning as a supervisor because they don't see their new role. They don't say, well, I was a great cop. Yes, you were a great cop. But now you have to be a good leader. It's a different role. You're not just doing police work. You're also in charge of resources. You have to understand how to utilize resources. That's the key to being a good leader, right? I don't have to be the most intelligent guy. I don't have to be the strongest guy in the unit, but I have to know how to use those resources, right? I have to be willing to say, you know what? That guy's stronger than me. Let me utilize that resource. This person is a better speaker than I am. Maybe utilize that resource. That's what good leaders do. But it takes humility.
That's the thing right there is the humility to understand that you're not the best in the room. And really, you there's no reason why you need to be the best in the room. And the humility to understand that part of your job as a leader is to develop the next leader. And if you're not helping them develop their skills,
beautiful,
you're failing. Because then when you leave, who's qualified to take your spot?
Beautiful. 100%. But again, that goes back to humility because, I don't know about the organizations you worked for, but I saw at the New York City Police Department that like training is expensive, right? It's extremely costly. So it becomes a secret squirrel society. Not everyone gets the specialized training. Maybe certain guys would get it. And it's not always to the guys that need it. Again, it goes back to nepotism. Some guy would get it because he's got a relationship with, he knows who. And again, I do believe that's an abuse and a misuse of resources. So what happens when someone has more training than someone else? Because there's not a vast majority go around because of tax dollars. Well, I might have that training that somebody else does. So you know what? That's a leg up when I want to get into a unit that he doesn't have now. So instead of sharing that information to make each other grow, I hold it back for myself. And that's what I notice in some leaders. And I used to say this, I really believe this. My goal was that the people that were under me, when they get promoted, they're better than I am. I actually, on the way here, I spoke to one of the guys that used to work for me. He became a sergeant. And he doesn't know it, right? I'm not going to tell him. But I was getting so excited in the car. I'm talking to him on the way here. And he's telling me all the stuff that he's doing. And the stuff that he says to his people. And it was all the stuff that I would teach him. But he's doing it even better than I am now. And I'm like, you know what? I did my job. I did my job because this kid's going to be even better than I was. Because he has all the attributes that I taught him. And now he puts his own spin on it. And that's the beauty. And that's what I say is we have to pass the torch. And it takes humility to do that.
I found that, I started promoting later into my career. I spent probably the last 7 years in a leadership position between supervisor and commander. But I found it was probably, looking back, it was probably 7 of the most enjoyable years of my career for that exact reason. For the ability to have that impact on bringing up somebody and encouraging their growth, as opposed to we've all worked for those bosses. They walk in the room and it's immediately, we're doing it my way. I think half the job of every leader should just get out of the way. Yeah. Just get out of the way and let your people do what
that's great.
I think that so many, they get the rank and then they think that they've got to have control over everything. And no, you got the rank. Step back and let the people work, and just kind of be there. Go, hey, what do you guys need? But
there are legitimate reasons for that, and people have to be able to identify it. That comes from I really believe that comes from a place of security or insecurity. If Very you're true. Secure in yourself and your abilities because you put the effort in to be a good leader, that's why I say you need to learn skill. I read so many books. I would read Colin Powell's book, right? I learned about the 40-70 rule, and that's what I used to practice. I read Jocko Willnick's books, Extreme Ownership, Dichotomy, and Leadership. And I would read these different leadership books to make me a better leader, to be better for these guys so that they could become better themselves. That's why I think the passion, that's why I think I fell in love with jiu-jitsu so much, even more than boxing. Because in a boxing gym, it's about being better than the next guy because guys want to make money. There's a purse involved. But in jiu-jitsu, you cannot train by yourself. There's no punching bag. In order to get better, I have to train with you. So how do I get better? When you get better. So we all grow together as a team. That's why I enjoy it so much, because that reminds me, in policing, I want us to grow as a team. I'm not trying to brag, but I would get phone calls from other special operations lieutenants. And they're like, what are you guys doing over there? You guys are kicking ass. And I said, listen, I don't think we're any more talented than you guys, but you have to build relationships. That is a key. They didn't want to let me down, and I didn't want to let them down. So when you build relationships, you could take it to the moon. You don't have to be the smartest guys, but you are a great team. Look at the Knicks right now. Why are they doing so great? Are they the most talented guys in the NBA? No, but these guys were a team in Villanova. So they're playing as a team. You can't beat it. You can't beat the team concept.
It's really cool when you see a team that gels together.
Yeah.
And you're just, again, I go back to just step back and let them go. And the other thing is when they start doing well, give them all the credit. And when anything goes to shit, make sure you don't let it fall down on them. Hey, it was my fault.
I need you to say it to the NYPD leadership, right? Because I've been saying the same thing. There's one guy in particular, myself and my partner on the podcast, we are so critical of his appointment. He was a detective. He drove a chief for many years. Extreme movement because of nepotism. He's now the deputy commissioner of operations. And I really believe they failed him. And he failed himself. If they wanted him to be this position, they should have let him grind and go through specific positions to get to that point so that he's ready. And he's been speaking publicly. And he's embarrassed himself because he's not ready for it. So I feel they embarrassed him, and he embarrassed himself. They're both to blame. He wasn't ready for that position yet. And it takes an extreme amount of humility. And he says a lot of things about, well, I did this and I did that. He's really pushing hard to get recognition. And that's why I always say this, and I say there's no I in team, but there's an I in idiot. You have to, exactly what we said. I think that good leaders, stoic and professional, and stoicism is the key to success. You don't have to say, I did this, or look what I did. Even if you did something, I would tell people, like, listen, even if I didn't know, it was Billy's idea. Try to give my guys a credit. And behind closed doors, I knew that they would tell people, listen, nah, that was Lieutenant Dim. I didn't have to praise myself. It will speak for itself. So sometimes you have to say less and do more. And like you said, get out of the way. I agree. It takes humility, right? As a special operations lieutenant, doing anti-crime, I'd go out in plain clothes and we were looking for illegal guns. We were the best at it. I mean, I was like a human detective when it came to getting guns off the street. But I would go out with my guys, and they already knew. We're on a scene. You might have to give me direction. It's okay. Hey, Lou, grab that guy. Okay. Lou, there's a shell over there. Can you put a cone on it? And I've seen that's where the pitfall comes in security, where some people are like, don't tell me what to do. Well, he's not telling you what to do. You guys are working together. You're an integral part of this team right now. That doesn't mean he doesn't respect you. He's the point man right now. It takes humility. Okay, no problem. Right? At least that's the way I saw it.
And that's, the weird thing, and I'm sure we've all worked with men and women like this. The weird part of, and maybe it's the same way in a firehouse. I don't know how it is in the military. I'm speaking strictly from the law enforcement side of the house. The really good cops rarely ever want to promote to the highest level. That's not part of what drives them. They're never driven by bars and stars. They're driven by the quality of work that they do, and they almost got to be pushed. Hey, take this leadership position, please.
Those are the guys you want to be in a leadership position. Absolutely.
Unfortunately,
that guy you want, yeah.
Unfortunately, the one, and if this is what drives you, and you're kind of along your story, man, day one, I want the stripes on my sleeves. I want the bars on my collar. I'm going to start studying. And so they do. They test well. They get into a leadership position and trying to play devil's advocate. Then they end up in a room and they've got to lead a team. And the first thing they start thinking is, man, I haven't done anything. And so the little that they do, they got to make sure they throw it out there. Trying to get, how about just saying, hey, you know what? I'm not the most experienced in this room. All I am is the guy that's got to do the paperwork. What do you need from me? But that takes that humility. That takes that ability to step back. What I think I am most fortunate is my time in what we call, SWAT or tactical operations, because you quickly learn it's not about the person, it's about the team.
Yeah.
And when you're going into a building,
spot on,
and I feel something on my shoulder as my partner, it's not a rank that I care about. Like I said, I could turn and it could be the team sergeant. Hey, can you cover that door? We're just another member of the team. You just happen to be the guy that's got more responsibility to make sure that ammo gets ordered or something like that. That's all.
That was it's funny you say that, right? I took the test, not because I wanted bars. I didn't care. I said, but I always believe in opportunity. The opportunity was there, I'm going to take it, right?
Yes.
But I would always say the best bosses are the ones that I don't have to wear my rank, that you would know by my presence and the way I interact with my men and women. That's why I enjoyed so much about plainclothes. If I was out with my team, even if I didn't say, people knew that I was the boss. They knew the interaction. They could see the dynamics of it, the nomenclature. But that was my pet peeve. And I would tell other sergeants and other lieutenants, don't do that. It's terrible. And when I say don't do that, sometimes, and especially with this generation, I said, to their benefit, also to their fault, they would question, well, why am I doing that? And I saw some of the sergeants and lieutenants, especially the sergeants, because the rank would be on the sleeve, they would go, because I said so. And I always say, like, what is that? Don't do that. Why do you have to point to the stripes? So the stripes, you want them to respect those stripes, but not you? I know a lot of people say, well, I respect the rank, but I don't respect the man. I want them to respect me. I want them that, God forbid, I'm in a burning building, like, you know what? I want to go get him. And I don't want them to be like, you know what? Too bad, so sad. So don't let the rank speak for yourself. It's just a job. It's a position. It has value, but your men and women have value too. And then sometimes I think that's where we lose this compassion for people and not understanding value, where they think, well, I'm better because I'm in this position. You're not better. Maybe better at certain things.
You happen to test better.
Right. But you're in a different job, a different position. Doesn't mean you're better. You actually could be the worst cop on the team.
Right.
But you're the boss who could use the proper resources.
I don't know who, because the highest ranking NYPD officer is the commissioner.
So the police commissioner is in charge of the police department, but it's not considered a uniform member of service. That's a political appointment.
Who's the highest rank?
The highest uniform rank is the chief of department.
Okay. So I don't know who's the most revered chief in the history of NYPD, but when I came on back in the early 90s, Daryl Gates was revered as the chief for LAPD, to the point that I had buddies that kept their ID card from when they were hired as Daryl Gates, the chief, regardless of who the new chief was.
And why? Why is that?
Because they revered him. They love that man.
Right, but why?
Because he took care of his people. At the end of the day, from the little bit that I know of him, he took care of his people.
We lost that. See, people know that. That's what I'm saying. They know that guy. Yeah, and I'm not saying, I'm sure he disciplined plenty of people.
Oh, hell yeah.
But they knew he was fair. He took care of them. That we lost that. I'm so happy to hear you say that, because we lost that. Because I can't think of someone now where I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna save my ID card for that guy.
I have a friend of mine, when I was heavily into running and doing triathlons and doing all that stuff.
Oh, I love
it. So LAPD takes their sports activities seriously. And so
yeah, NYPD too.
And so he made the number. Have you heard of the race Baker to Vegas? It's a running race that runs every year. So it starts in Baker, California, and it goes to Las Vegas, Nevada. It's a law enforcement relay race. It's 20 legs, 20 members of the team.
Nice.
And my buddy at the time made the number one, so LA's number one team. And I mean, it was, you'd think you were a professional athlete.
Deal, huh?
Yeah, the captains are calling like, okay, you've got a massage scheduled for this day, blah, blah, blah,
That's pretty cool, though. That's cool.
And back at that time, so this is probably still the early 2000s, leg one at that time used to be 3.5 miles. It was very short. And
I want to be that guy.
This shows you in the pecking order. He made the number one team, but he got leg one because he was basically the number 20 guy of the 20.
Gotcha.
And they basically came to him and said, go out and get us a lead. And if you don't go to Vegas. And they weren't joking. That was the mentality. But the thing where the long way around to this is, so when they won the overall race, I wanted to make sure that I saw him get his award. So I was in the auditorium.
Yeah.
Daryl Gates had long been retired at this point. He came in and got a standing ovation.
Wow.
Now I'm
gonna look it up when I get out of here. I'm looking up Daryl Gates.
But he was one of those guys, and that's the thing is that being a good leader is about taking care of your people. And it's like you said, it's not overlooking things. It's not punishing people, because I think at the end of the day, one of the things about us as humans, we actually like rules. Show me the rules that I can operate in, and when I step outside the line, then you're good. Hey, I get it. You got to knock me back, but it's the thing of you move the damn guardrails depending on who you're dealing with. That's what creates the animosity within an organization. The other thing is, the last thing you want to do is give a bunch of cops 12, 14 hours a day to make up their own opinions. And I think one of the things that leaders don't do is, how about just give us the information. Don't let us formulate our own story, because then we're going to come up with the worst version of the story. And then it builds like a snowball,
It's true. I do believe that people, they value structure and boundaries, right? People want to know, it's like anything else, right? Even in a car, you want to know when you could stop and when you could go. It's the same thing. People want to know in life, like, okay, what are my boundaries, right? Because at the same token, if there's no boundaries, there's no system, there's no structure.
And granted, there's going to be people who are going to be constantly bouncing off the boundaries, and there's going to be some guy that's never going to get near them.
Well, there's no value also. They're not going to feel as if, wow, people want to tell, as people move on with their careers, they want to tell the story, hey, I was on so-and-so's team. So-and-so was my boss. And listen, if you were out of line, he let you know. People love telling those stories. They might not love it while they're going through it, but they love to pass on those stories, right? And that's true, because people do enjoy structure. They want to know their boundaries. They want to know how far to go left, how far to go right. I absolutely believe that. They don't want things running amok. They might say, yes, people want freedom, but they don't want the inmates run the asylum either.
Correct.
They want to know, well, he's the boss and, we have structure. That's a big problem. That's what's actually going on with the NYPD right now. There's no clear vision who's actually running the department. The leadership has run amok. And that's a major problem. People want to know, you know what? Paul's in charge. We're all role players on team. Paul's got to say. They want to know who's going to be who is going to be the decisive decision, right? At the end of the day, who's making that decision?
Your time as a sergeant, I know you ultimately made lieutenant, but did that drive you to want to promote higher, or was there ever a point where you're like, nope, I'm good right here at sergeant?
I was happy. Again, an opportunity came up to take the lieutenant's test. I put very little effort into it because I was so happy doing anti-crime as a sergeant. I mean, I felt like I was on top of the world. I'm in plain clothes, right? With a bunch of big burly fellow cops. Some of them were military also. I mean, they became my brothers. We were family, and I mean, it was fun too. I mean, every day was someone's turn. Sometimes it was my turn. It was someone else's turn to get abused for that day. You know how it is. So like, okay, I got a stupid shirt on. I'm getting it today. But it was fun. When you I miss that.
I tell people is if you're in a team and they're not busting your balls, that's more about you than the team.
Yeah, then they really don't like you.
You know, if you're in a team and people aren't just cracking on each other, you need to like, whoa, that's not a good sign.
I mean, the pictures that they would send me and I superimposed, like, oh God. I mean, you know what? That's what makes me smile when I think about the police department. That's the stuff I remember that was fun. Mm-hmm. Some of the other stuff I could do without. But when people ask, do you miss police work? I don't know if I miss. I enjoy every time of being outside police work, but that's the stuff I miss. Like the brotherhood of like just someone making. I know it sounds funny, like someone making fun of me. Like it was just. Well, I knew like sometimes I was going into the office and I'm about to open that door because I knew my guys were there already. Like, well, I got like a funny haircut or something. Like, oh, here we go. But you know, you were laughing. That door opened. I was like, ah! They just start clowning on you right away. Oh, here we go. But it was fun. It was fun.
I tell people that
excuse me.
Law enforcement is a great job. And I
so.
honestly believe even if I was starting in 2024, there would still be acts. I'd sit back 20 years from now and go, man, you remember this, you remember this, you remember because at the end of the day, it's cops and robbers. It's good guys and bad guys. Oh, yeah. And if you don't enjoy that aspect of it, then don't get in the job because I don't care. Times are going to flow and they're going to be different. But at the end of the day, it's the good people and the bad people. And we're the gate that divides them, you know? And,
we sure are. Where?
and so I say to them is you hit the nail on the head. Just go have fun.
Oh my God, it was great.
Your department's going to give you a nice big book that says you can do this. Here's our policies and procedures. Just operate within those policies and procedures and obviously the corresponding laws, but you can have fun with this job. And it is. You spend 20 or 30 years in it.
It was fun. I remember years ago, even when I was a cop, just that was the culture, the pranks. It was fun. I remember we had the two biggest guys in the precinct. These two monsters. They were huge. I don't know if you got, and they were in the projects in Stapleton, and back then we would call it a vertical. Now they call it a turret. It means they go in the building, they go up the elevator to the rooftop, and then from the rooftop they take the stairs down. It's called a vertical, or an interior now, which they're inspecting the hallways and making sure there's no nefarious characters. But I remember they put their car in front of the building. At the time I was new. All of us were on foot post, but we had a connection with the cab company. So I remember I took a cab and I had the key to the car. I don't remember how I got the key to it, but we went to the pet store and we bought two little pinkies. Yeah, mice. Oh. We put it inside the car. These two big guys who were watching them from across the street. They get to the car and they see the two little mice sitting on the chairs. They wouldn't get in the car. So I had someone pick them up and take them back to the precinct. They got another car. I'll never forget. I drove the car back. We were clowning them. They were clowning us. It was just fun. I remember one time some girl, we put like 50 crickets in the car and she was just going crazy. That was fun. You know, it was part of police work, the pranks. It was a good time. You know, they would throw buckets of water off the rooftop and you walk into the precinct. Well, people don't do that anymore. They don't do it. You would get complaints.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, and I know this is a real slippery slope and you know, but yeah, the pranks were fun. You know,
they were.
I mean, I remember days you put the pepper spray, the mace in the vents.
Oh yeah,
and kick it on high.
It was probably already high when you turn on the edge.
You know, it just oh yeah. I mean, we've lost our ability just to laugh. You know, not to make a huge segue, but you know, they talk about how all the comedians today, you know, they're so afraid just to tell jokes.
I know,
because they're going to get canceled.
Yeah.
If we just stop getting so wrapped up into things and just laugh a little bit more and let stuff roll off our back, we'd be so much better. You know,
but it's a shame that we lost that, right? Where do we get to the point that our skin has become so sensitive that we worry about everything someone says? That's the beauty. If they're not making fun of you, like you said before, then they don't like you. They should make fun of you. You know, that's part of it. In brotherhood, sisterhood, whatever cases, they should make fun of you.
I'm gonna say Gen X is a positive and a negative. Are you still part of Gen X? Were you born? What year were you born?
I was born January 80.
80. Okay, so I think you're right at the tail end of it.
I think it's
but the thing
82, right? Maybe.
The thing you got to remember is Gen X is, for the most part, the parents who raised all the 20 and 30 year olds today, who are the ones who are the most vocal about be nice to each other, stop hurting each other's feelings. So it's our kids.
It's interesting you say that.
That have lost the thick skin. But yet Gen X claims to be the most thick-skinned of all the generations.
That's a good point, but you know what? You got me thinking. The wheels are going. Wow, you know, you're right. Yeah.
So, I don't know. I don't know what happened. I really don't.
Social media?
I'm sure social media had an impact in it. All the little things that have built over time. The participation trophies. Everybody's got to get an award. We can't leave somebody out. It just all those things that we've gone away from. Work hard and be number one and be the best. Now it almost is a punishment if you're the best. You know what? I busted my ass. I got straight A's. Yeah, but we're still going to give the award to the 3.0 student because we don't want them to feel bad. I don't care if they feel bad. I busted my ass. This is what I've accomplished.
When I was going through it as a kid, it was rough. But as an adult, I remember telling my father, like, you know what, thank you, I appreciate it. I was like, you made me tough because I was into basketball as a kid. That was always, my sport. And I remember I would go to games, and my father would come to games when I was playing CYO ball. And I was like, Dad, how'd I do today? He's like, honestly, you suck today. I was like, really? Yeah, this was not your day. And he would tell me, listen, that kid did better than you. Whatever kid you were playing against, whoever you were guarding, I'm like, all right, it is, you're young. Sometimes you cry, but you learn, you get over it, and eventually move on from that. But I'm glad he did that, and I want to bring that with my kids too.
I don't know how it is with the other martial arts, but I'm just thinking in my head right now, I'm thinking about Jiu-Jitsu. You're not going to get a participation trophy in Jiu-Jitsu.
No.
Either you can better the opponent or they're going to better you. And you've got two options, like you said. You could subordinate your ego and go, okay, how do I need to improve? Or you're going to walk away from the mat.
I got a competition coming up in June, so see how it goes. But as I get older, unfortunately, there's less guys to compete with. I compete with a lot of the younger guys, and
I was just rolling this morning. His name is Gabe. He's a great kid. He's going to be graduating high school next month. He's already slated to go off to the Navy.
Oh, nice.
He's a beast.
I'm sure.
An absolute beast.
Just the physicality.
I can't keep up with his strength or his speed. Oh. And it's just, where I look at it and go, man, in my mind, I'm still that young. And my body goes, no, it's not.
Yeah. No, I know it. Sometimes I go, rolling around with guys at 25 or 30, and you don't have that pop like that. I know the next move I'm supposed to do.
I can't get there as quick as they can.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, God. All right, kid.
So how long into your career did you become a lieutenant?
That's a good question. So January 2009, I became sergeant, and then January 2015. So now I had 11 years on. Again, it was January. January for sergeant, January for lieutenant.
What was the biggest thing you noticed going from sergeant to lieutenant?
The transition. Oh, it's funny you said, again, just like you said, getting out of the way. So I have the ideology, I still believe in that you lead from the front. And I think sometimes people have this mis-ideology what that means. Leading from the front doesn't mean being in the middle. Because I don't think a leader should be in the middle. Because when you're in the middle, you can't see everything, right? But you need to lead from the front. And when you're in the front, that's when you start to guide everybody where to go. But you don't want to be in the middle to where you can't see anything, right? So you're looking down the scope of a rifle, right? That would be a bad. If I was with a squad of guys, on a hill in the military, if I'm the lieutenant, I don't want to be looking down the scope of a rifle, right? I can only see that. I want to be in the front with the guys, looking at all my men and what's in front of me, so I can see what everyone is doing. That's where I think a leader needs to be, and that's what I had to transition. So as a sergeant, you're looking at just your team, but as a lieutenant, you're managing. This is where you learn the skills to manage the people below you and the people above you. That's where I think the transition is. So as a lieutenant, you manage the sergeants and the cops, and you also have to manage your captains. There's an art to managing people above you.
That's what I often say is when you move from sergeant to lieutenant, all of a sudden your scope starts, you have to not only look down and take care of your people, you're the one that's got to start looking up to the top of the chain.
Absolutely.
You know, so it really increases your field of vision on what you have to be mindful of.
Absolutely. You have to be able to try to, I also believe that comes to where you have to not know your limitations and capabilities of your teams. Understand the limitations and capabilities so that you can actually, let's say, for instance, if you're failing at something, right? That's where the skill comes in managing up. Well, I don't wait for the captain to tell me, listen, you failed, right? I say, I go to him first, say, listen, I acknowledge we have this robbery pattern going on. We've been unsuccessful in finding the perpetrator. This is what we've done. We have had numerous men out sick, whatever the case is, right? This is what I'm doing to fill those gaps and how we're going to address this condition, right? So I'm that's managing up. That doesn't mean I'm telling him what to do. He's aware of what's going on. I'm not waiting for him to come tell me, listen, we're missing the mark here.
Right.
That's why I say the art is managing up. As a lieutenant, you are, I know that I hate that word, but they say you're part of management. Right. You're now part of organizational operations. So you have to manage below and up as compared to sergeant when you're a frontline supervisor and you're a team leader. So that's where I think the dichotomy is.
I think one of the things that you really have to be, especially at the lieutenant level, where you can really screw this up is you can undermine your sergeant's or your supervisor's authority without even realizing it.
Yes.
That thing you walk into a team meeting and all of a sudden you start being the most vocal or whatever. It's those little things that you have to be so much more cognizant of saying, I need to make sure that I'm doing everything to ensure their rank and their authority in the eyes of their team.
Well, I had a rule, and this is stuff that I read. So if I went to a meeting, if I wanted input and I wanted advice and suggestions, I would speak last. And if I was just giving direction and I was giving an order for that day, I would speak first. So that was my rule. And again, if the sergeant was addressing his team, I would do exactly what you said. I would get out of the way. I would just say, hey, Sarge, love it. You guys having a great meeting? Can I participate? Or is this something I should take off? Nah, we're good. You got it. See you later. Give him or her that respect, right? So absolutely.
Where do you think you learned your leadership style from, in the sense of wanting to read books, wanting to be as much as, because that's one of the downsides to promoting up. You still want to be there for your people, but you also have to understand there's a point where in a given situation, hey, you guys have fun. I have to remove myself. I can't stay here with you. You know, first round's on me, but I'm out of here or whatever. You know, there are certain things that you lose, but the idea of constantly reading, learning, where does that come from?
It's funny you say that. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because as you go up, it gets lonely. It's so true, right? Because you lose that camaraderie, you lose those friends, right? You walk into a room and they're like, you know, there could be a bunch of guys talking, they're chatting it up, having a good time. It's usually what they go, and you know, you're like, don't worry about it. Listen, let's have a good time. You know, and it's good, right? They knew that there's boundaries. And if they do that, it's because they respect you, right? You know what, bosses? Or there's certain times, you know, it's great. Guys were having a conversation, maybe something, and I'd walk into a room by accident, and the guys are discussing something like, hey, boss, you don't want to hear this. Gotcha, thank you. You know what? That's cool. They respect you. Like, listen, something amongst them that if I hear it,
I have to take action.
I have to take action. So they keep it amongst themselves, and that is, you know what? I'm not talking about corruption. We're just right. Whatever the case is, let them handle it. You don't need to get involved, and that's good. But that means you address those boundaries. But I knew early on that I wanted to be a leader because I wanted to make people better. I believe in those team relationships, and I saw some bad leadership, and that was really my drive. And my idea of bad leadership was this.
You're the only one who ever saw bad leadership in law enforcement. Everybody else saw perfect leadership.
Right. But, you know, this do as I say, you know, not as I do, it would drive me crazy. And this, you know, pointing to their chest or pointing at, I said, I don't want to be that guy, you know, and I don't want to be a boss, a supervisor. I want to be a leader. I want to be someone that they remember in a, like you said, what's his name again? I remember. Daryl Gates?
Daryl Gates.
Daryl Gates. I got to remember. Daryl Gates. You know, that's you want to be remembered in a sense, like that was someone that took care of them, you know, and someone that made their career better, built those relationships. That's what you want. And that's what feels great to me is that here I am now, almost 2 years of retirement. September will be 2 years.
Well, here's an example. You ask a Marine today about Chesty Puller.
Oh, yeah.
None of them have ever served under him, but his
legacy, right?
Almost a mystique.
Yeah.
You know?
5 Navy Crosses.
Carries on to this day. General Mattis. You know, there are certain leaders who will always be looked at as that man or woman. That leader was who I wanted to work for.
Oh, absolutely. When people tell you, man, you like Chesty, you're like, woo, you feel good. You know what? You say, you know, that's a man of pride. You know, you want to emulate that style. Absolutely. 100%. And, you know, that's why I love reading Colin Powell's book. I find him to be, you know, he was extremely intelligent. I think he was extremely humble. He was also a New York City kid. So that was great. You know, and he said he learned a lot of his leadership from Jewish people that he worked for. So it was really interesting, you know, and he talks about the 40-70 rule, which I'm a big component of. That means that when you go to a scene, and I teach my guys that now, if you have less than 40% of the information, you don't have enough to make a decision. And if you wait till you have 70% or more, you wait too long. So it's that sweet spot before them. Is decision making is critical. So, you know, and that was my experience. You know, being in a leadership position, it was fascinating to me that I get to be like a big brother, father, and help these people, and that was rewarding for me. Was to watch them grow, getting guys when they're young on the job and they're kind of green, and you watch them grow, and then they become leaders themselves, and you're like, did my job. That feels good, you know. And I watch some of these, and that's what I'm saying. These guys today, in almost 2 years of retirement, they still call me, hey, how you doing, you know, and tell me about their day, and they still call me Lieutenant. I go, you don't have to call me Lieutenant anymore, you know. They're like, hey, Lou. I'm like, you can call me Eric, you can call me Dimmons. No, it's all right. I'll still call you Lou. And you know what? It's pretty cool that they do that because they don't have to, but they still feel that sense of respect. So that brings a smile.
Let's pivot now to something maybe you are proud of it. I don't mean this sarcastically, but you have the title of NYPD's most complained or most complaints. Yes. Run me through that.
Oh, that's great. So that's where I talk about how politics has infected police work. So for I know a lot of your listeners are from the West Coast, and most cities and agencies do not have what's called a Civilian Complaint Review Board. You have internal affairs for most agencies that do these type of investigations, right? So the Civilian Complaint Review Board for New York City is a separate entity. It's an independent watchdog made up of civilians with some police panel. Very few. The overwhelming majority of the Civilian Complaint Review Board is a civilian component, civilian entity. And they investigate 4 different categories that correspond to police work. That's force of abuse, abuse of authority, discourtesy, offensive language. Well, now they just add another one, untruthful statements, for those questions, right? For those categories. So as an independent watchdog, they get funding, and there's certain laws enacted by the city council that they have to follow to do their investigations. So if you look at my career, there's a complete dichotomy. You can look from 2004 at my inception to 2017. To me, it's almost like one bracket. There's a huge dichotomy if you look from 2018 to my retirement, September 22, because of politics and legislation. And I say that because if I retire 2017, it's my contention that you would read an article in the paper that I was some type of hero. I'm not saying that I should be, but I'm just making a comparison and how well my career went. And the amount of complaints I received from the Civilian Complaint Review Board were very few. They were kind of sporadic. It was a byproduct of doing intrusive police work. I did self-initiated police work my entire career. But 2018 to 2022, I got 75% of the majority of my complaints. And they were substantiated. And you could see the complete difference. The legislation change, everything enacted, and we started to get into this climatic change of politics under Mayor Bill de Blasio and the Civilian Complaint Review Board. The investigators changed the ideology, the complete bias and disdain for police work. And then we also had what's an inception of the disciplinary matrix, different guidelines. And then we also had this push of removing alpha males from the police department, emasculating the police department. And if you look at my records, public records called the 50A in New York City, you could actually just type in Eric Dare, most complaint cop, and it will give you all the complaints I have for the Civilian Complaint Review Board. And some of those allegations I was actually found not guilty, but it doesn't tell you that. So just looking at that.
On the flip side, though, does it say founded or guilty for the ones that were substantiated? It says
substantiated.
Okay.
And even like one of them, I went to trial, administrative trial, and I won. I was found not guilty. But if you actually look at that 50A, the public record, it doesn't give that indication. It just says substantiated. So this whole legislation, it was created, I believe, in my opinion, to emasculate the police department and to remove alpha males like myself doing police work, especially with this DEI movement. And that's what I was doing. I was removing illegal firearms, and I was being attacked by an overzealous Civilian Complaint Review Board for doing that type of work. And that's why I use that moniker, most complaint cop, which my name was smeared in the paper. I wear it as a moniker to mock the system. I'm on a crusade to fight the system, to show that I will not be the most complaint cop. Arguably, there's another police officer right now who's actually just promoted to captain, who's a lieutenant, who's on par with the complaints I have. It's a battle. I'm not sure who's the most complaint cop, but he or someone else will surpass me because of legislation that is going on right now in the overzealous Civilian Complaint Review Board that we have. There's just a complete disdain and bias for police work. And also, the problem with it also is what they didn't have before 2018, now they have, is the Civilian Complaint Review Board can self-initiate their own cases based on camera footage without a complainant. So that's another problem. And then there's civil liability that corresponds to pay for that also.
Does the Civilian Review Board just arbitrarily review BWC footage?
I don't know how they do it or how they decide, but they can view body cam footage at any time they request it. They can get body cam footage. Even if there's an officer involved shooting, they have new legislation that was just enacted recently that the body cam footage, if requested, has to be turned over to the Civilian Complaint Review Board within 90 days, which I find extremely problematic. That could actually compromise an investigation. And that's the problem with New York City. That's really a burden on the cops. It's overwhelming and handicapping the cops from doing their job. You have extreme amount of hurdles and obstacles to do your job. Numerous layers of oversight. You have internal affairs, you have your own supervisors, you have the Attorney General, and you have the Civilian Complaint Review Board. So ironically, the complaints I received from the Civilian Complaint Review Board, I was getting awards at the same time. I got the most amount of civilian complaints of anyone, and I was also Lieutenant of the Year. I got the most complaints, and I was Leader of the Finest the same year. I got a proclamation from the borough president for saving a 5-year-old kid. I was investigating the shooters that were involved in it. I also lost 20 vacation days from a civilian complaint for the same incident. This was my career. That's why I said there's a huge dichotomy.
Once you were, and I'll say deep into it.
Sure.
Did you start getting any voices from within NYPD of like, hey, Eric, tone it down a little bit. Hey, Eric, start change, or from your supervision where they were like, hey, just keep doing police work the way you've been doing police work and we'll deal with the civilian complaint?
Well, it's funny. I'm so glad you said that. So I was always told, be careful. It's like, I'm so sick of hearing that. Like, what does that mean? So to get a civilian complaint is a byproduct of doing intrusive police work. What I wanted was them to protect me, to stand up for me, say, hey, listen, Lieutenant Dim and his special operations teams are in the thick of it. They're in housing in the South Bronx, removing illegal firearms from the volatile perpetrators, right? We're going to dismiss these complaints because ABCD. We've awarded him. This case was solved, but they didn't stand up for me. Instead, they told me to be careful. I'll get the guns, but just be careful. Find the shooter, but be careful. What does that mean? Or, maybe you want to change up your leadership style. Let the guys do it. Just sit back. And I don't believe in that. That's why I say lead from the front, not the middle, but how can I expect my men and women to put their civil liability on the line, to put their careers on the line from the Civilian Complaint Review Board, and I don't put myself at risk with them? What kind of leader am I? I couldn't do it. I had the opportunity. Plenty of people said to me, well, listen, why don't you just stay in the precinct and let the guys go do it? I said, I can't do that. I can't sleep at night. I can't sleep at night knowing that I sent the men and women out there to do a job that I asked them to do. And I don't face any potential liability. It's just on them. That's completely selfish. It's not something I could do. Not only that, I also felt that their safety was my responsibility also. To this day, I'm proud to say, in the majority of my career, in almost 14 years as a supervisor, and the entire time as a special operations supervisor, I never lost any men and women, and only 2 officer-involved shootings that entire time. I think, and we were getting sometimes 3 and 4 guns in a day. I think it's phenomenal results. And we just had an officer posthumously promoted to detective. He was killed doing the same type of police work that my men and women did. And I said, that's one thing I'm proud of. I will wear these complaints and I will own them because my men and women went home safe. So I'm on a crusade to show and mock the system and showing the bias and disdain for police work.
And you said you lost vacation days. Was that their form of punishment, was docking you time off?
Sure, it could. Well, there's an array of type of punishment you could face. The administrative trial I went to, I actually was found not guilty. I was facing termination. The Civilian Complaint Review Board, their attorneys had requested termination. So we have the January 2021, which we're seeing it throughout the entire country, but especially in New York City, was the inception of the disciplinary matrix. And that was the doctrine that was being applied to my case. So according to the disciplinary matrix, because of my rank, my time on the job, my experience, I was attacked with the aggravating factors, which would lead to termination. So the Civilian Complaint Review Board asked for termination. And ironically, the complainant, who was the perpetrator in that case that I arrested, he was in Rikers at the time of my trial. While he was in Rikers, he slashed a correctional officer in the face, and I was still facing termination. And he was in for trying to stab a Parkchester peace officer in the Bronx. So this is the politics that's going on right now. The Civilian Complaint Review Board has made a criminal-first society. They're fighting for this criminal's rights to take down a well-respected, decorated law enforcement officer. That hurts public safety.
When was the review board implemented? Has it been there your entire career?
It was implemented, I think, somewhere in the 70s.
Okay.
But it fell under the time of the umbrella of the police department. And then Mayor David Dinkins, a former mayor, in 1993, I think it was 92 or 93, he transitioned the Civilian Complaint Review Board to its own independent watchdog, which was comprised of civilian investigators. But over time, you could see in 30 some odd years how the legislation has changed. More funding, the investigators there, the chairman, the acting chair, the executive director of that organization, or have this complete political ideology of this anti-police rhetoric. It's my contention also, and once I prove it, I will turn over that information. I do believe that many members of the Civilian Complaint Review Board are activists that take part in these anti-police movements. I also, at this time in retirement, I participate on a monthly basis, virtually, at the Civilian Complaint Review Board monthly meetings, and where I've testified numerous times, and I hear the guest speakers along with the Civilian Complaint Review Board panel themselves. It's complete based on emotion. It's all anti-police. It's complete bias and disdain for the police. The chairman of the Civilian Complaint Review Board admitted that when they have a case, they do not take the totality of circumstances. They do not look at the perception of what the cop was seeing, which completely violates Graham versus Connor.
We're going to take a quick break from the conversation. First, thank you for your continued support. Second, I appreciate the fact that you've made it to this point in the conversation, but I still need more help. If you would, if you're not already, please follow, subscribe on whatever platform you're getting the podcast. If you could leave me a rating, leave me a comment or a thumbs up. And last, If you could share this, either this episode or the podcast, with anybody that you think might benefit from it, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you again. Let's get back into the conversation.
They only look at the perception and the emotion based for the civilian complaint, for the civilian complainant themselves. So if that's not biased, that's extremely problematic.
The board is how many people?
There's the civilian complaint board itself has a panel of it's an executive director, a chairman. There are panel members that vote on a complaint, but there's probably maybe 100 somewhat investigators.
How does somebody get on the board? Do you know?
It's a separate entity. They're hired. It's a job. Like I don't know exactly the hiring process.
I'm just wondering. Where I'm going with this is I'm wondering what the background professionally of the members are. Are they all attorneys or are they all executives?
Well, the board itself, there is one former chief. Like I said, that's the one police perspective. The rest of them are civilians of different walks of life. I don't know exactly what degree, but this is their forte. But the investigators themselves that actually do the investigations, most of them are college kids. Most of them are actually not New York City natives. They come from different parts of the country. They come to New York City. They have aspirations to go into law or different things. This is a stepping stone for them, and most of them have a complete anti-police sentiment already embedded in their brains. Just complete implicit bias for the police department.
Was all of this the driving force in you deciding to retire, or did you retire when, according to your plan, that was when you wanted to go out?
So I wanted to retire. I wanted to actually do 20 years on the street. I did 18 years and 9 months. The entire time was on the street. And at this time, I knew I could no longer do what I was paid and trained to do. I was offered the intelligence unit to be the commander of that. I was offered the detective squad. But at that point, I made a determination. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I need to retire and speak out, because if I don't, there are going to be far, far more men and women who surpass my record, and I will look like a chump change compared to them as the most complained cop. I'm the most complained cop, and I was able to retire. But if you get on the job right now in New York City and you have aspirations to do self-initiated, intrusive police work, you will not make it. You will not make it. Civilian Complaint Review Board will eat you up and spit you out. You will not make it. You will be terminated. And if you're not terminated, your record is going to be so egregious, you'll never be able to get a job in another police department. And it will not only with law enforcement, it will just affect you in your life. It's almost, I say it now, the 50A, the public record, it's almost like being accused of a rape charge. Because if I just went out right now in retirement, right? I'm married, so I don't have to worry about it. But if I decided I'm going to go out and date, if I was a single man, right? Today's day, arguably, a smart woman would, research your information. Just get an idea. If a woman was to type in my name, it's going to say most complained cop, and she's going to read to this case. If she doesn't know police work, oh my God, he pointed his gun at somebody. She's going to think I'm a monster. So it affects you in law enforcement and in life. So I decided that I need to go out and speak out and combat this, and I want to be the catalyst for change.
Did you know that that's what you were going to be doing when in your retirement? Was that kind of like a goal of yours, or did it just happen to grow once you were retired?
It grew my last year. So I had no aspiration. I figured at some point I would retire, and maybe I just wanted to go out and do jiu-jitsu or maybe eventually if I could get good enough, maybe be a coach or something. Who knows? Or just spend time with my kids. But this, I knew I had to do this. I'm not a religious person. I'm more of a spiritual person. I do like Buddhism. I spend a lot of time in Thailand. I'm into it. And I got some Thai tattoos and blessed by monks. I'm into that stuff. But I knew I had to do this. I reached out to my partner. He was already out starting the podcast slowly. And I said, listen, I see you speaking out. I've already did my homework on this. When I retire, and it will be soon, I want to come on the podcast and speak and talk. And then we join forces, and now we give our perspective together. It's amazing. I think that, so many alpha males and alpha females are being pushed out of law enforcement. It's cops turned YouTubers. We have to get this message out, to the squeaky wheel gets the oil in order to have change. Because, like I said, at least for New York City Police Department, it's happened to other cities throughout the country, especially democratic cities. your law enforcement career is not only affected, it's you in life. Your civil liability, your freedom is affected. Like I said, you type in public record, you type in my name, it's going to tell a story that, and the story tells, it's missing context. Do I have the most complaints? Yes. Who are those complaints from? How they get, these are those volatile, violent perpetrators. They have a right to make a complaint. The Civilian Complaint Review Board has it to state. They find me guilty. But there's no context. These complaints, they don't tell you that this person is a 10-time shooter. This person has already done time for murder. This is a missing link from it. And that's why I say it's unfortunate. It's become a criminal-first society.
Looking at it from a different perspective. We were talking about leadership and the importance of good leaders.
Sure.
I'll put you on the spot. Could you not have been able to do as much or better work from within the organization to help the other men and women of NYPD by staying in?
Great question. Absolutely not. I'm actually more effective being a force from outside within. And that's part of my crusade and be a catalyst for change, also to change the unions. Because the unions are supposed to be the voice for the law enforcement while they're working, while they're active. While you're active, yes, you have First Amendment rights, freedom of speech, but you held to certain boundaries and certain requirements, right? You have to remain apolitical when you're in law enforcement. So my voice is silent and active in law enforcement. My path in retirement is far more effective. And the power, the sword has been social media.
For you now going forward, taking yourself from the perspective of having been a leader and now being a voice of reason to a new man or woman coming on the job, 2024, what advice would you give them for being able to still go out, do police work, have fun, but make a 20-year career?
Oh, wow.
And I'll keep it in the parameters of NYPD.
That's interesting that you say that. Well, listen, if you are going to enter the NYPD in 2024, you have to, yes, you can listen, especially if you're a DAT. If you're going to, let's say, for instance, if you're going into the police department in 2024 and you come from a DAT, a family of cops, you have to tell those family members, I understand what you did back in the day, and everybody loves to use that. I understand the style of police work that you did. But not only has policy, we talked about this offline, not only has policy have changed over the years, but law has changed. And I'm now policing in a new environment. One thing I will tell you that has not changed over the years, and this is what I say that why I still believe some faith in policing. You still have metal handcuffs on your belt. Whether it's John Smith in 1950 or comparison to now, we changed, yes, we have vests, and over time the flashlights changed and the body cameras, but we all still have the same handcuffs. That hasn't changed. So that part I agree. I still think you could be an effective police officer, but you have to move differently. So you have to be far more, you have to be your own advocate. So every time you do police work, you have to be extremely thorough and you have to be your own crime scene investigator. You have to read. This ideology of years ago of having information passed through, bypassed through the police department, getting mentored and getting information. Yes, it's valuable, but you have to be self-initiated, self-taught by reading. You have to understand the law. You can't just rely anymore on your unions and counsel. You have to know the law yourself. You have to understand the law inside and out before you take action. You can still be an effective police officer, but I think that the bedrock and the foundation to public safety is intrusive police work. Right? When I talk about intrusive police work, I refer to the case of People versus the Boer. Right? That's I'm sure you probably know it. 1976, a 4-tiered system. Right? Level 4 is probable cause. Reasonable cause to believe someone committed a crime. That's easy. We make an arrest. It's the other levels that I would tell someone that they have to study till they're blue in the face. That's level 3. If you're going to stop and detain someone, you have to understand that under the 4th Amendment, the right to seizure, you have to understand under the Supreme Court case, People versus the Boer, you have the right to detain somebody, but you have to know the legality of it, inside and out. Level 2, the common law right of inquiry, right, which is founded suspicion, you believe that criminality is afoot, you have to understand when you speak to someone, you engage them, and you ask incriminating questions, that it may lead to something. You have to understand, engage people. Level one, it's easy. Objective reason to approach someone. You have to know this inside and out. So this ideology is just being a good street cop, and you have to be an intellect now. That's where I think it's changed. You have to be a complete intellect. You can do intrusive police work, but we have to move at a slower pace. As I am moving quick, we do have to be. We have to move at a slower pace because now it has to be wrapped up like a present, right? It has to be on body camera from beginning to end, and you have to be able. You have to be a painter. I used to tell my guys, when you make an arrest and you're going to speak to the district attorney, you have to be like Bob Ross. And you have to tell them, like, this is a little tree, this is a blue sky. You have to give every detail, and you can't expect them to explain it for you. You have to take charge. You have to be a leader, and you have to be an intellect. That's where I think things have changed.
You definitely hit on what I think is one of the most important things that I've seen from when I first started is it is so much more incumbent upon you about documentation today.
Yes.
And I'm in no way alluding to that 20, 30 years ago, we didn't document, but we didn't document with, like you said, we didn't paint as full of a picture. We just had to get you a decent, if somebody could grasp the concept, move on. I will say that for me, one of the things that I found that made me actually a better officer was working fraud, because trying to write out a fraud case so that a DA could understand it, you ended up having to get out some dictionaries
Right.
But I had a conversation with, he was a mentor of mine when I was a brand new, young officer. He was a couple of years ahead of me, and he ultimately became a chief.
Oh, nice.
And I was having a conversation with him because his son was just about to hit the road as a new cop with a different agency. It's like, I don't think we could do it. And he said it the best. He goes, Paul, no matter how much you try, you're still looking at it from when we started 30 years ago.
He's right.
He's going to learn how to do it today. And this is even this is about 3 years ago now. He goes, he's going to learn how to do it today. He'll learn because every generation it gets the same thing from the old guys. Oh, back when the one thing I will say is I honestly believe we're going through right now, and I'll take ownership of it, but our 1960s, that same time, because if you talk to some of the cops who were working back in the 60s and 70s, they'll tell you it was as violent, if not more, than what it is today. And it was that social injustice. I'll use the analogy of the Vietnam War changed war because all of a sudden the average person turned it on the 6 o'clock news while they were eating dinner and saw what war was like. Before the Vietnam War, they may have heard stories. Family members may have come home and gave them a very limited view. They didn't know what war was like.
You're right.
What we're dealing with now is body-worn camera is showing the public what police work is like. And the thing that, if I could say anything at all, if somebody doesn't want to go to jail, there is no way to make it look pretty on camera. If they have a desire not to go to jail, it's not gonna look pretty on camera.
But that's the part where I think is the most challenging, and is it even if you are the most intellectual cop, you're the most savvy, you've done your homework, you take pride in your job, you're still fighting optics.
Very true.
And that's the problem, what happens with body camera footage. And I say to people who critique police work, just in my circumstance, Civilian Complaint Review Board, right? I believe they suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect. You know what the Dunning-Kruger effect? So in the 1990s, there was a study by two professors at a university.
I've heard the name.
It's a great study. Professor Dunning and Professor Kruger. This applies to most things in life. What they found is the least you know about a subject, the more you think you can do it. It's like anything else, right? Every time people go to a restaurant, right, and like they get served by something like, this is a terrible waiter. I could do this job better. Could you? Just because you only see them walk over to the table, so you don't know what the job entails. So in your mind, you think it's easy. Or you watch the the big heavy set guy sitting on the couch. He watches Tom Brady, watches a football game. Ah, man, why'd he throw that pass? Well, it's easy to say. You're not playing the game, right? You're sitting on the couch. But most people, they suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect. And there's no profession as critiqued as law enforcement. Everyone thinks they could be a better cop. You know, and that's why I like to test people's logic. I don't like to argument. I don't believe that anyone wins an argument. I believe opposition meets opportunity. I sit down all the time with people that are in complete opposition, don't agree. I like to hear what their perspective is, mine, and we might not agree, but we'll have a respectful conversation. But I like to test their logic. Sometimes people will critique an arrest situation, and they'll say, oh, why did they have to hit him? Why did they have to use a taser, whatever force that was applied? So I'll say, okay, great. How would you handle it? And that's easy just to test their logic. And what do most people say? Oh, I would arrest him. Well, what do you think the cop is trying to do? He's trying to do the arrest. But you haven't talked about the tools, the equipment that was applied because of the optics. Even with body camera footage, this is the problem I find. I think body camera footage is great for major incidents. I think it's great. God forbid you and I are working together. And let's say we arrest a female perpetrator. And we transport her in the back of our car. And she knows she's going to jail. She just killed her husband, God forbid. So we're driving her back to the precinct. She says, you and I raped her. Thank God for that body camera footage is going to save our lives, right? And that's why I say by major incidents. But when it comes to minor incidents, especially physical altercations, it paints a terrible picture. If you and I are tussling with a perpetrator, an adversary, a person of interest, we have a subject. We had to apply force. It's going to look far more egregious than what we can explain. And that's where people have the idea. And they say, well, why didn't you do this or do that? You know what? Because they didn't feel the tension that you felt, right? And we talk about Jiu-Jitsu. That's why I think everybody should do it. It's because you understand the human body. How controlling another human being is probably the hardest thing to do. And people say, well, why did you use so much force? So I always ask people too. I said, well, if I'm rambling on, let me know, by the way.
No.
I do this all day.
The one jiu-jitsu thing I'll say is, man, there's that thing where somebody's got a gi on. You really don't see how big or strong they are. And as soon as you put your hands on them, you're like, oh, see? This is, it's, people don't understand that.
But we all have kids. You hold a 2-year-old baby. It's happened to me. And the baby pokes you in the eye. And you go, oh, that's a 2-year-old baby pokes you in the eye. Now we're dealing with an adult female, an adult male who's on PCP, who knows they're going to jail, who's having the worst day of their life. We have to bring that person in. And most, I would say most cops, I haven't seen it yet. I don't know if you have. I've seen the Tyree Nichols case in Memphis, but personally, within the NYPD, I've never seen a cop say, you know what, I'm going to hurt somebody today. Never. I've even seen they're pretty careful. Even if they're punching someone, they're really not trying to hurt the person. They're just trying to get them in handcuffs. They just want to stop it. Most guys just want to get coffee. You know,
most of us realize they're like, man, that's gonna be a lot of paperwork.
Exactly.
I don't want to spend 3 hours at the hospital getting him cleared the book.
And that's the funny part, right? You know, some people want to paint this picture as propaganda. Cops want to go out and beat people up, but most guys are like, that's paperwork, right? I don't want to do that. You know, I gotta document this. I mean, because we all know it's right. It's 50 pieces of paperwork on the same line. It's so redundant. And I also think that's part of the design to keep us structured and disciplined. But most cops are like, I just want to get coffee. I didn't ask for this. But optics, you're fighting optics. It's an information war. I mean, how do you feel about optics? I think that's the part that when it comes to money, when you're in a physical altercation, it's really tough to explain. And you can, and some people just don't get it. You know, and it happened to me, right? With Civilian Complaint Review Board, I had this violent perpetrator. Has a history of fighting with cops. Known shooter, already did time for shooting people. Already rendered a lieutenant unconscious in the past in another precinct in Manhattan. He was wanted for a shooting. All right, I know where the guy is. I'm going to go get him. But what tactical mindset am I going with? This is what I'm going with. I already know that he fights with police. I know he's not going. So we're going there. We're geared up. Everybody's hearts are going. We know. It's going to be a fight. It's going to be a crowd. I already know, right? And here's a problem also, right? But the public doesn't understand, right? So you're a cop. When you approach a potential subject, your tactical mindset, your team mindset is built on that arrest rap sheet. I would assume it's not built on their conviction rates. But when you go to court, like for a civilian complaint review, a civilian complaint or civil liability, those arrests are not allowed to be mentioned, only his convictions. So that happened to me on a case. So your perpetrator could have 20 felony arrests, but only been convicted of one misdemeanor. Because we know how the dichotomy is between the arrest and a conviction. So I don't go with a tactical plan based on their conviction rate. Go based on their arrest rap sheet. So this is what I know. So immediately, this perpetrator says, I'm not going. He takes a full swing in my face. I ducked it. I hit him. I deployed strikes. We're fighting. At some point, he bites two cops. They had to use tasers. I mean, he was fighting hard. I kept deploying punches. I never saw this. But the civilian complaint review board was able to slow it down and freeze its controlled environment. At some point, one of my cops was able to grab the perpetrator's hand, and I was still throwing punches. I never saw that. And they found me guilty for unnecessary force, and I lost 20 vacation days. But I felt him still fighting. That, I think, is a part they don't understand. You are still have that fog of war. You're engaged, and you know, it's like this imaginary referee. But for me, the fight was still on.
No, and the worst part about it is, I agree 100% that not every incident, but you wouldn't have enough time. I got zero problem with a review. What I have a problem with is, like you said, somebody sit here watching the game right now, you know, hey, I'm going to age myself, just hit Nolan Ryan's fastball. It ain't that simple. It isn't that, no matter how much training and experience, he's a professional baseball player, and he's still more likely to strike out than hit the ball.
Yeah.
We are professionally trained police officers. I get it. But the thing is that when somebody else gets a say, the perpetrator gets a say in how that operation goes, and then you're trying to simply review it off body-worn cameras where you're getting a limited view, or you have the ability to then freeze it. You know, there's so much that the subjectivity completely goes away. And you can Monday morning quarterback somebody, but you can't then go, well, this is what I would have done. You weren't necessarily in that situation. You don't necessarily have the experience or the training to handle that situation. Like you said, you know, we go back to, you know, Jiu-Jitsu or any type of contact sport. Just because this person's 5'10", 185 doesn't mean he's going to hit the same way as that guy who's 5'10", 185. There are so many different variables that come into play, you know? And so I do... You want to have a civilian review board? Great. But there's got to be some balance where there has to be the ability to interject the voice from the police department and kind of go, we've reviewed it based on tactics, policy, and we find that they're within policy.
You know, it's fascinating. You know, it's great, by the way, right? Marlon was our introduction. So I actually had Marlon on my podcast, and we spoke to Marlon about body camera footage, and it was fascinating. If you have an opportunity to see this portion. So I asked him about body cameras, and it was great because my partner also spoke about the body camera issue. And what was fascinating to me is something Marlon said. It's like, you know what? It really made me think about it. And it's when you testify or you give your interpretation of a police incident you were involved in, do you want to speak on it before you saw body camera footage or after? And he talks about the corrupt mind. It's really interesting, right? Because you and I we're involved. Let's say you and I are working together. We're involved in a police incident, right? We both have different perceptions, timing, the angles. You're going to give your description. I give my description. We're on the same incident together. There may be two different stories. And that's the truth, right? But now if we watch the body camera footage, now we see a different story. Now we see the same story. If we now give that story, are we lying? It's quite interesting, right? Because if we never saw the body camera footage, our stories would be completely organic. But once we watch the body camera footage, we start to question, wow, did I see that? Was I standing there? I mean, I've testified before. I'm sure it's happened to you. I remember as a Civilian Complaint Review Board, in one of my interviews, they asked me where I was standing. This was before I saw the body camera footage. And I told them where I was standing. And I think I said I was like 20 feet away or something like that. And then when I watched the body camera footage, I was right near the guy. I was in a completely different spot, and I wasn't lying, but that's what I remember. That's what I felt. That's what I saw. So it's fascinating to me. If you see Marlon speak about it, it's really interesting how seeing the body camera footage could corrupt your mind, because now it's, well, am I lying? If I and that's why I was asking that. Well, if I testify of what I saw in the body camera footage, is that a lie? Because what I remember is not the same as what's on the body camera footage.
Man, that is such a hard. I'll say for the one thing is there's not a hard line in the sand.
Right.
I honestly believe that every officer should have the opportunity to review their footage. It's their incident. It's their, But like you said, are you documenting what you remember, or are you documenting what you saw?
Exactly.
That's the hard thing, Now, if you document something and it's completely has no material bearing, I'll just use your example. Man, I thought I was 20 feet from him. Oh, look, you were 4 feet from him. If that aspect of what you wrote has no bearing on anything, it should just move on. Oh, I'm sorry. I was 4 feet from him. What I remembered was 20. It's where they start making those little things part of their decision as to your culpability.
Well, that's what they're doing. They're weaponizing these intricacies as untruthful statements. And the reason why is because the disciplinary matrix for the NYPD, since the inception, untruthful, misleading statements with aggravating factors lead to termination. And I think that is the ultimate goal, is to remove the alpha males and alpha females from law enforcement. I do believe that there is a orchestrated, coordinated attack on law enforcement in this country to remove and emasculate law enforcement, because it's tangible. You could overturn the style of policing by weakening the masses, and I really believe that.
So does the Civilian Review Board have ultimate authority over the doling out of punishment, or is it these are our findings and then it has to be corroborated by the police department?
So as I was saying, so if it goes to trial, the police commissioner will have the final say. However, because of politics, we found, I think it was last year. So my partner and I, we observed a city council hearing meeting with the police department. And I think that at the time, the year prior, I think they said there was total 3 cases that were overturned by the commissioner. 3 total. I think the percentage is obviously less than even 1%. And I do believe that's because of politics. So ultimately, the Civilian Complaint Review Board does have the say, and even without that, just the substantiations alone for the Civilian Complaint Review Board, even if the police commissioner overturns it, that could hold you back for promotion. I was supposed to be promoted to captain. I did not get promoted because of all these civilian complaints.
Think you would have stayed if you got promoted to captain?
No.
Still would have
absolutely
pulled the pin?
Yeah, they asked me what I wanted. I said I want to get promoted. I want to walk off the stage and retire. So absolutely, I still would have left. For me, it was, again, it wasn't the rank. I always took the test because it was the opportunity. But no, I still would have chose this path.
Personally, now that you've stepped away from the job, I know we've kind of talked about it, but
sure.
How was that initial transition to where you were no longer, quote unquote, a cop?
I actually felt great. I felt free because for me, my career ended way before that. Because the police work that I was paid and trained to do, I believe, ended in the George Floyd riots at that point. So for me, I retired September 2022. So I had about 2 years to understand that the police work that I did, that I could no longer do, that I was paid and trained to do was obliterated. Was definitely something of the past. It was evolving, and as we said before, just as your mentor said to you, that the kids now will learn in a different way. I knew that I could make the transition, but it just wasn't for me at that time. I was ready to retire. I felt that it was my time. Like I said, I had that opportunity. I could go to intelligence or the squad, and I felt that that was not my path. This is my path to be the catalyst to protect the cops that are out there now. Let them understand that the game has changed. You have to be an intellect. You have to read People versus the Boer. You have to read Terry versus Ohio. You cannot just get the information from the next cop. You have to read it. You want to know about your pension? Read some books on economics. Read Tax-Free Wealth. Like these books I've read, they yes, respect the people you work with to get information, but you have to read it yourself too. So I still, this is by far, I'm really happy with this decision I made.
As a New Yorker and an NYPD officer, and in my head, I'm looking back on the videos that we've all seen, whether it be like some of the early 80s rap videos, and obviously they're showing, portions of the Bronx, but even you see the old videos of Manhattan and Times Square when it was hookers and peep shows.
Yeah, sure. You
see New York getting back to that level.
Yes, obviously the picture looks different, right? You don't see the graffiti in the way it was before. It's a different world today, right? I think in some ways it's worse. I think that back then it was more vibrant and more vivid because the way life moved, right? If you're selling drugs on a corner, you could see what we used to call a cheese line, 30, 40 people lined up to buy. If you're buying drugs now, everything's done through technology. You buy it through text, or things are actually sent to you in the mail, or so it's different movement. I do think things are I actually think they're worse at this point, but they're worse not only for the public, but I think they're worse for the cops, obviously doing their job. I think their financial freedom is at stake, and I also believe that we're seeing more cops incarcerated now than we've ever seen for doing their job. And that's why I've also been a big advocate to advise the cops. I don't know what the policies here, but in New York City, it's always been something that's frowned upon. It's never been a tactic to curb crime, and then it's vehicle pursuits. So I try to advise these guys to refrain from it. Listen, because it's more likely, God forbid, that you're gonna mow a 5-year-old kid.
Yeah,
it's just not worth it. It's so hard not to. I'll be honest. If I'm in a cop car right now, if I'm in the police car and someone takes off on me, it's in your blood. But that's why I say to the kids today, that's where things have changed. You have to have that discipline to say, you know what? We'll skin a cat another way. We'll get him another way. We're not going to chase him because it's just right now with optics, and you couldn't find yourself incarcerated and land up in jail.
And you're talking more some of the outer boroughs because, you're not getting in a pursuit in Manhattan.
Plenty of pursuits in Manhattan. Absolutely.
Really?
Yes, sure.
What do they go a block and a half and then get stuck? Because nobody gets out of the way. I've seen fire engines that damn near need to drive
on the sidewalk. They drive on the FDR drive. They drive They do it. So it happens. But I advise not to. Unless extreme exigent circumstance. God forbid you've seen someone in front of you trying to shoot a kid or legitimately kidnap a kid in front of you, or, have a rape victim. There are times that it's necessary. But in most circumstances, especially with bail reform, the policies that we have right now, it's not worth it to chase that perpetrator. That perpetrator most likely is not getting prosecuted anyway. Is not getting bail, is not staying in custody. So you're putting your own financial and your civil liability, your financial freedom on the line. Is it worth it? With the technology that we have now, right? We're moving to artificial intelligence. We're moving to drones. There are other ways to get it. Now, if we get on those topics, let me tell you, artificial intelligence is scary. What we're seeing right now, and they're going to implement it in the NYPD, is they're going to have artificial intelligence review body cameras to look for accountability and transparency. I find that extremely problematic because the human element, the skills of a law enforcement officer, the observation skills, the behavioral indicators that you learn as a police officer, I do not believe could be mimicked by artificial intelligence.
All I would say to that is unless because the one thing that is inherently a problem with a lot of body-worn camera is just a very limited scope of view. And there are sometimes decision factors. I might be talking to you and dealing with you, but my peripheral is still with an eye on your buddy that's off my body-worn camera. And what actions is your buddy starting to do, or those type things?
Well, absolutely, right? I always give this description, right? The world is not flat. The world is round, right? And when you look at body count,
not according to some people.
That's true. There are some flat earthers, right? It's so true. It's funny you say that. But when you look at body camera footage, it's kind of flat, right? You're not looking at the entire spectrum, right? So that's why I ask you this, right? Because I always give this scenario, and I explain this to people. How many police officers do you think it takes to arrest a subject?
As many as it takes.
Great answer.
Yeah. Because it's gonna. There are so many factors involved.
Could it take 20?
Of course.
Right. So it's funny, right? Because I always hear people say, especially in New York City,
it's going to get really hard though with 20 because you're limited. I say this jokingly because trying to get 20 sets of hands in on somebody, you just run in.
Right. But I'm saying it in a different sense, and I say why.
It's never. I'm not going to even say never, but rarely should it ever be one-on-one.
Correct. But here's the reason why I say you mean each 20, right? I say it could take 50. When people always say, oh, why there's so many cops on the scene? You see police cars all over the place, cops. And here's what I always say. This is what I teach people. When you arrest an adversary, let's say one, you are not arresting one person. It's one incident. I always say an arrest is not how many people are involved, it's how many incidents. So I don't say how many, in my mind, and what I teach people is, it's not how many police officers are there, it's how many hands and how many eyes. How many eyes and how many hands do I need to actually affect this arrest? So if I have an adversary, right, let's say, again, let's say the South Bronx where I worked, right? We'll say I'm on 149th Street, 3rd Avenue. That is the second largest shopping district in the entire city. Huge hub, packed with people, right? If we're arresting one person, it could take me 50 people.
Okay, because you're going to need 40 just to keep a barrier from the public.
Right. I need to hold the public back. I need to shut down pedestrian traffic. I need to stop vehicular traffic. I need to watch Granny that's hanging out the window, the people that are hanging out the rooftops. I need to watch the police car so no one takes off with the police car. I need to, if I have the perpetrator in a car, when we take him out, I need to have the cops watch that car to secure potential evidence. So, and I need to, guys on the other side of the sidewalk, the other side, maybe 2 blocks up, shutting down traffic. It could take 50 people. So I would say it's not one arrest, it's one incident. And that's why when people say, oh, why are you wasting all these resources for this one guy? Well, you know what? That's why people understand how costly and how costly it is to the taxpayer when we allow legislation and policies that create this criminal first society. Because it could take 50 police officers 1 hour to arrest that one person, right? Because our job is to bring that person to custody with the minimal amount of force and to bring that person as safely as possible. Not only we make the public safe, but we have to make sure that the perpetrator is safe. So that's what people don't understand about police work. It is so adversarial, right? It's so complex. I think that it's the most intriguing profession because you could critique it, but until you do it, I always say, everybody wants to, you could be the coach, but could you be the player? I mean, could you be in the game?
And I honestly believe that we are in a period right now where there are a lot of people who want to sit on the sidelines and talk about how police work should be done.
Right.
And I am not completely against outside eyes looking at us. Because, like I said, the old adage, if you're not doing anything wrong, there shouldn't be no reason somebody can look at you.
Right.
I will say this, though, that it is not a job that I like how they're putting people through simulators now and how quickly a lot of these, be nice to people are just shooting them. They put them in those fat simulators. But the thing is, what I go back to is you could give me a scenario in the academy. I could deal with that same scenario in my career And every single time I deal with it in my career, it was completely different than what they taught me in the academy. Because people are different.
Correct.
You could have a situation going completely smooth. And we've all been there. Domestic call, whatever. You're in the house. Everything's going smooth. And then that one family member, you're just about ready to get the guy in handcuffs. And then the one family member starts.
Yeah.
And then sets him off. It's just like all of those little things that just,
I'll go get in and get out.
Or the flip side, you've got everything under control. And then that one partner who came into the call late, who's always the one stirring shit up.
Yeah.
You're like,
yeah.
Jesus, could you have just not said anything?
Yeah.
I mean, it is.
You're 100% right. That's why our goal was, I'm sure the same thing for you, is just like get in and get out as possible. Yeah. Right? Because you're right. Anything could set it off. And I know that we all know that feeling when you walk on eggshells. You're like, all right, we're almost out of here. We're almost out. Right? You get out. And like you said, that one family member comes. Like, oh.
Yep.
And it's almost like you're starting over, right? Starting from scratch.
Yes.
Now we got to, build a repertoire again with this family. And yeah. How many times you marry and divorce people, right? It's marry and divorce them.
I loved it. It was 30 plus years of my life, and I have zero regrets for it. In my heart, I believe we're in a period right now. The pendulum's going to swing back. The public's not going to necessarily say we don't care what you do, but they're going to start kind of like a parent. Just go take care of business. Get it back under control, because that's what's going to happen. Is they're going to, and I loosely say all of this outside influence that's reducing the optics of the way they want police work done. At some point in time, it's going to have a significant blowback. Something significant's going to happen, and then the silent majority, who's just kind of sitting back right now, is going to be the one to go. Just go do police work. Take care of the streets. Get it back under control. Unfortunately, like you said, there are a lot of men and women who are going to lose their careers. There are a lot of men and women who are going to lose their lives. The one thing I would say is, and this goes back to me when I was in the academy, and we had this old salt ex-Vietnam guy, and it always rang in my head: be judged by 12, but don't be carried by 6.
Oh yeah.
And I don't think that should ever go away from law enforcement. You make sure you go home. You make sure your partners go home.
No, I agree. Absolutely. That ultimately, right, that safety is paramount, right? That's number one. And that's why we're in this business, right? To save lives. I don't think any cop is like, oh, I can't wait to be a cop because I'm going to be rich.
No.
Because if you want it to be, listen, you'll have the above ground. You're not going to have the in-ground pool. You'll have a pool, but it'll be the above ground. But I don't think there's anyone that goes into this line of work monetarily. Yeah, there's some attractive things, pension, for some early retirement. But the actual job itself, it is a thankless job, right? You're working in communities that are not of your own in most cases, not all. In most cases, you're working in communities not your own. You're putting your life on the line for people you don't know. But that's the question I ask myself all the time. There's so many different factors, right? But how did we get to this point where the cop is now demonized and villainized, and people not understand that, hey, these men and women are risking their lives for people they don't know, and yet we have propaganda pushing them as villains and demons? That's where we need to change the political ideology. In some way, it's kind of like terrorism when you say that, right? To get to that seismic shift that you talk about. I do believe there will be a pendulum at some point. I do believe it will swing back. But what is it going to take? Are there going to be lives lost for it? What are there jobs lost for it? Is there some type of psyop where people can't say things because of it? I think it's going to take a substantial amount to get to the seismic shift, because I believe it took years to get to this point. I do think it would take years to get back. And could we get back with body cameras? That's why I talk about optics. Can people live with, they talk about transparency. Can they be comfortable seeing the truth of what police work really is? It's ugly. It is.
I honestly believe so. and I'll go back to my analogy of the first time there were cameras in Vietnam War and people saw what war was like, and they went, oh my God. To today, we see during the Gulf Wars, during the Iraq War, we've seen war footage. We routinely watch drone footage. It's just norm. It's gone so far to the opposite extreme that video games now have become so realistic. We're almost desensitized to it.
I knew you were going to say that. It's interesting because people talk about that all the time. Do you think there is a correlation? Do you think that we're desensitized to violence? Do you think that is now part of our culture?
I think, like we talked about earlier, I think we've become desensitized to the repercussions. And what I mean by that is, you grew up as a kid, you said something to the wrong guy on the basketball court and you got a fist to the face. Oh, don't say that again. Nowadays, you can type something on keyboard. There's no immediate. You can go play a video game. You respawn. You re-come to life. There's no actual feeling of the ramifications of it. So I don't necessarily say that I'm sure some psychologist out there believes that the level of desensitization, if that's a word, to violence is impacted by the types of what the kids are exposed to today. I think it's more the lack of an actual feeling of the repercussions of those actions.
I think that's a great way to put it. I do. I think that makes a lot of sense. Again, because we talked about it earlier, right? There's actions and consequences, and they're not getting those consequences, so they get the consequences there. Makes sense to me. I don't necessarily think that we're becoming more violent. I mean, throughout history, you can always see violence against police officers is always going to be there. There's always going to be people that don't want to go to jail, and there's always going to be those that are going to be willing to, hey, let's go for it. I think what we're seeing is just there is the lack of what's going to be the impact on me to make somebody think twice about it. I agree, but do you believe? Because I do. I mean, I don't know what the data is. I would have to look, but I do believe that it's always been it's a dangerous profession, right? When you're doing law enforcement, right? But I do believe that most of the violence against police officers was because there was a crime that an adversary was trying to evade from. Where I think it's changed is that the police themselves have become the opposition. And then I do think that people are attacking police just for being in that profession, where it's also some type of hate crime. I know we had that in the 70s, right? We had that with the Black Liberation Army, the Black Panthers, but I do think that part has really perplexed now.
Again, it would be one of those things to go back and look at studies. I don't know if I'll call it a hatred. I don't know if the hatred of law enforcement, of government, is equal to what they saw in the 70s. I don't know if it's increased more because there's the access to more information. There's the ability for you and I in the 70s didn't have the ability to reach as many people as we do today by simply putting a video up on Instagram or TikTok complaining about something.
Absolutely.
The ability to get our opinions out in front of more people has definitely grown. I do think, like I said, for the most part, and I believe this in my heart, the greater majority of society still wants us out there. They still respect and like police officers.
I agree with you. It's funny you say that too, right? Because you talk to people, I talk to people, and at least for me, I'd say, right? Because growing up in New York City, it's when we have an election, the Democrats always win. It's a democratic stronghold in New York City. But everyone I talk to has the same ideology I do. I said, wait a minute. I'm not saying a complete conservative. I find myself, I believe in common sense, but you have to register somewhere. So I had to register a Republican. But I speak to people, and they have the same ideology I do. So I say, where are all these people that are voting for this democratic stronghold? Because the people most of the people I interact with, believe what I'm saying. And I'm not just saying, just Caucasian people. I'm talking about all walks of life. They believe in common sense. They want a good life. They want prosperity. they want safety. So I'm like, well, where are these people then? But unfortunately, it really comes down to, I think, particularly in New York, and I'm sure it's here too. It's low votership. For some reason, the Republicans don't go out and vote. But
I think it's apathy across the board. I
maybe,
think people are just like, I don't care. And I really honestly believe less and less young people are interested in it. I'd be real. I do think so.
I think on the left, though, I think the left does a great job of getting the young people out to vote.
Do you think they actually show up at the polls, or do you think they just make a lot of noise when they have a camera in front of them?
That's a good question. Probably just make noise. Right? That's a good point.
It's gonna be an interesting election this time, and see what ends up happening.
Oh yeah. I agree absolutely.
But I mean that's a completely different show, and I have zero interest in it.
Some people they assume I was in the military, I wear a cap, I got a beard. He must be this big MAGA guy. I am not.
I see you as a Bernie guy.
I'm not a super right or super left. I believe in America, and I believe in common sense. I believe in America. Honestly, that's what I believe in, and we need to get back to that. Just common sense. I mean, what's going on in this country, and I don't care. Listen, you can love whoever you will love. But do we have to sexualize kids in schools? And some of this propaganda and indoctrinating kids, it's too far. I mean, we have to, I don't think we should sexualize kids with any type of gender issues or talk about sex period with 4-year-olds in school. So that's nothing to do with gayness, but we are pushing a lot of this stuff to really just change the society, emasculate society. I do believe that we're moving to this whole ideology of artificial intelligence that is tried to form a police state. It's funny, right? Because in New York City, they fought stop, question, and frisk, which is a fantastic tool for policing, because they talk about control and government. And yes, there is a margin of error, but I'd rather have that margin of error dealing with the human element than this artificial intelligence, which you're now involved in a police state.
What was the movie with Will Smith where he was the one human cop and all the other cops were robots?
Oh, yeah.
Wasn't iRobot or something?
iRobot, yeah.
I mean, it'd be interesting, should it get to that point, then what will they complain about?
Yeah.
That the robot was acting too by the book,
What do you say, the robot's racist now? I mean, this is, again...
It's that old thing, be careful what you ask for.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Is the grass greener on the other side? And that's why I say I really do believe, I'm not some conspiracy theorist, but I do believe that there is a push in this country for the Democrats to stay as a stronghold. So ultimately, I believe in follow the money, right? You follow the money. Democrats don't want to lose power. They get all the stock tips. I mean, we see it. Most of these Democrats make $150,000, $200,000 a year, and they have 15 million net worth. Why? Because they have all the information, the stock tips. So I don't believe they want to lose power. And it comes down to the police force. How do we change a society? You have to emasculate the police force. And it's not with the leadership. They do it with the boots on the ground, because the boots on the ground are tangible. We could actually get to a police officer, right? We could get to Eric Dim, and we could pepper up his record with civilian complaints and have the alpha males removed. And ironically, I think the paradox to this is that when you have meek, timid, and docile people in law enforcement, it's actually far more dangerous for the public. I believe those type of characteristics lead more to firearm use of police officers than alpha males that are confident they don't need their firearms. So I just think it's a complete paradox.
Going on that thought process, though, playing devil's advocate.
Sure.
I'm a Democrat. I want to control everything. Doesn't a degradation of society and its safety have a negative impact on me?
Well, you would think so, but it's funny you say that. But we look at the Democrats who push for defund the police, but yet most of those Democrats who have this net worth, what do they have? Private security. They all have. We even seen it in this whole movement, right? In I think it was Portland when they had the Chaz zone.
No, the first thing they did was put up barriers and put people at the perimeter with security and
They
guns.
had a police zone, right? Their autonomous zone was a police zone.
And their ultimate undoing was the fact that the people inside the zone didn't want to go by everybody didn't want to play by the same rules.
Exactly. So I think that the Democrats, when they push this, they understand that safety is an issue, and that's why they have private security. They all have private security. I mean, you think Pelosi doesn't have any security? They all do, you know? So they're not practicing what they preach. Yeah. I mean, right now we're headed for some dark times, especially right now with these open borders, the migrants. I mean, we could have migrants and citizens in the streets having all-out fights, brawls. Who knows? That's where it's headed.
I hate to say this in such a flippant way, but all we can do is just sit back and see what evolves, unfortunately. I mean, it's one of those things that you and I have stepped away from the job.
Yes.
We no longer have a hand in it. We can hope that those that are doing the job today are here's the bigger negative impact that I think when I look at what comes 10, 15 years from now. Nobody wants to be a cop today. So agencies are having to lower their standards to get people in the door.
Yes. You
now have to deal with that lowered standard, that lowered quality of officer for the next 15 or 20 years.
Well, I call it the post-George Floyd processing, hiring effect. And that's exactly what's happening.
I'm just going to stop you right there. I will push back on that. I stepped out of the academy right after the Rodney King riots. There are those poignant moments in time that have a bearing on us. So, yes, George Floyd was a pivotal moment for law enforcement in this country. It changed a lot of things, but there's going to be another incident down the road.
Well, absolutely. I do believe that the country is seething right now for the next George Floyd. You know, especially as we get close to the election. I do believe that. Yeah, and I do agree with you. Absolutely. It changed. Will we come back from that? Yes. But right now, that we have, along with the DEI movement, it has changed the face of law enforcement. I do believe it's emasculated law enforcement throughout the entire country, predominantly in democratic cities. To have that democratic stronghold, pushes criminal-first society, allowing all the illegal aliens. What does it lead to? It leads to votes. Illegal aliens, they're pushing for them to vote. Those are voters for the Democratic Party. Criminal-first society, we have people vote for the Democratic Party, so the Democratic Party could stay at the stronghold while putting everyone's public safety at risk. But the Democratic Party themselves, most of these actors involved, they have private security. They're not living in the same neighborhoods. They're pushing their ideology. It's funny that we say that because, I didn't come here to pick on the Democrats, but I do believe that the Democratic Party, especially Democratic Socialists, are biased themselves and show some extreme amount of prejudice towards. If I was black, I would be insulted by the Democratic Party. You're saying that I need an extra benefit to get this job because I'm black? I know plenty of black guys I worked with that are far superior than I was. They don't need some type of benefit. They deserve the job because they were good. And we should put people in their places because let it be organic.
I just keep coming back to, and I'm really not trying to sound like a broken record.
Sure.
I just think this is just we're on a damn fucking merry-go-round, and the same story just comes back around every 20, 30 years. I remember coming on the job in the early 90s, and they said the same thing. As a white male, you had to be, for whatever reason, when the merry-go-round comes around, it's being, somebody is pushing that agenda. It benefits some political group. And the unfortunate thing is that we, as first responders, usually end up feeling the brunt of it. Obviously, firefighters a little less. But that's why I said I believe the police law enforcement feels the brunt. Back to what I was saying, I think because we're tangible. In order to change a society, right, you have to change law and order. So who do you attack first? You attack the police. It's the boots on the ground that are tangible. I could get to you. Your boots are on the ground. We could attack your record, attack your career,
or attack your financial freedom and have you and other people like you removed. Other people will see the position you're in and say, you know what? I'm not going to police in that manner. I'm not going to do intrusive police work. It's unfortunate. We've removed, and I say intrusive police work is the bedrock to a secure society, to safety, right? When you do a traffic stop, that's intrusive police work. But most cops now are becoming security guards because it's the safest route, right? This is one of the professions that you go to work and you say, well, how do I not do my job so I don't get in trouble, right? Imagine you're a construction worker and you got this full tool belt, right? And they say, okay, put this nail in the wall, but don't use any of your tools. And you're like, well, how do I do this? That's what it is being a cop right now. Arrest this guy, but don't use the stuff that's on your belt. Don't use your hands. You're like, well, how do I do this, right? And I think that's really, a lot of the problem. But how do we move forward? I mean, I hope you're right that this is a circle. I really do, because it has to be. Because it's just how can we keep going?
I would say that my challenge to anybody who's listening, who's a new or newer officer, regardless of the city you're in, make that your challenge. Make it a challenge to that you do police work the right way, do police work intrusively the way you're supposed to, and not give them the ammunition to be able to curtail your career.
Well, I love that you say that, and I don't want to pick on it.
No.
This is your show.
No,
but
please.
I love that you say that. Please. Can I? Okay. You said the right way. What is the right way? That's the issue.
Within the parameters that you are allowed to operate today.
Well, that's why I still feel that you could be a victim of optics, right? Because look, right. So there was a study, right, that the taser is effective. It's pretty much like the flip of a coin, right? We know it's not effective, right? If you're in a deadly,
it's effective on us because we tend to like in the wrong way. Oh shit!
But when you're in a deadly encounter, are you going to rely on your taser? You have to use your firearm, right?
No.
But we have all these people saying, use your taser. If you're in a situation, and look, let me even circle back with that, right? At one point, the taser was looked at as this non-lethal item. And now there's been instances where the taser has been a contributing factor to someone's death because they're already hopped up on all kinds of substances. They had that one in California last year, right? Hopped on all kinds of substances. The person is probably going into a cardiac arrest or excited delirium already for whatever substance. The taser is just another contributing factor. But you did your job appropriately. You have an emotionally disturbed person, you have someone in a mental crisis, you bring them into custody, you use the taser that you're trained with. That's what's been promoted for you to use. And yet, the optics still don't look great. And then we see it. We see compromised integrity at the upper echelon of police departments throughout the country. And you have the chief, for instance, of Los Angeles, already infecting the investigation by telling the public through transparency that, you know what, we see things here that may be problematic. Already putting that out there before the investigation is done, just to show that if there's any doubt, well, you know what, we'll put the blame on the police officers. So even then, they did their job right. I say the right way. But they still could find themselves terminated, incarcerated. That's where I see the problem.
I agree with you 100%.
And I don't mean to pick on what you said.
No. And I'm not saying that what I said is 100% blanket. It's the point I'm trying to make is that we still need cops out there. I do honestly believe there's no way for you or I to remove that knowledge bias of what it was like when we came on the job to trying to do it today. We aren't that brand new sponge that's there to soak up water. What I'm saying is I do honestly believe you can do the job. You can be effective at it. You just have to operate within these parameters. Now, I am not saying that there aren't going to be situations where you'll be like, shit, For example, I would throw any leader under the bus who comes out in front of the camera and says, we have not completed our investigation, but I'm going to start making statements to it. Please let us conduct an investigation. We will be fully transparent, but give us some time to do the investigation, And this is where I think for you and I, and when I say you and I, just in conversation, you can't take out the politics of it And at the end of the day, many of these leaders, police chiefs, sheriffs, whatever, they are servants to the politics first. That's not going away. That's always been that way. We've all worked with people who have been promoted up because of who they know, not necessarily what they know. That's not going away.
100%.
And so it's not that I'm saying, oh, just screw it, give up, quit. I'm just saying that aspect of the job is never going to go away.
That's a great point, right? I like the way you put that. We're going to go down this rabbit hole, but the politics, right? But I believe, correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, I don't want to put words.
You're wrong.
You're wrong. That's it. But would you be saying the politics of the law enforcement environment or to politics itself? Because I feel you're saying the politics of law enforcement, like who gets ahead. But what I feel, and if I'm wrong, tell me, what I see now is that the upper echelon is actually pandering to the politics, the progressive movement, pandering to the left, so that we could say, yes, leaving doubt that the cop did their job wrong, so that they could pander to the left, just in case there's going to be an angry mob. Well, you know what? We already said this might be some doubt. So you know what? We'll bury this police officer so we don't have an angry mob. That's what I mean by them pandering out to politics.
What I meant by politics, and this was not towards a Democratic or a Republican. This is the politics.
That's what I mean.
Of public service.
Right. But that's what I'm saying. Exactly. The politics of public service. But do you think that there is a difference from what I'm saying? I agree. That's always been, right? Even if you look back in the 70s. And I say that the reason why I point to the 70s, I think the 70s is the closest era that mirrors right now, at least for New York City. I think in California, too. It's kind of like, I think anytime something's with New York City, it's like, look at California, they're like on par. It's like brother and sister. I think there was always politics of public service. But now I feel they put these weak-minded and self-serving leaders in charge of police departments in democratic cities throughout this country, so that the leftist politics can twist their heads in any way which they want. Well, if you don't do this, we're gonna have the angry mob out there. If you don't, if you prosecute this case, we're gonna have the angry mob out there. If you don't bury this police officer, that's what I see. I mean, I don't know if you.
So I would go back to my question for you. When you came on the job, who was the chief of police, or I forget what's
police commissioner Ray Kelly.
No. The highest ranking uniformed officer, the one who was promoted to that rank.
It was Chief Esposito.
Okay. So where I'm going with that is, prior to Esposito, who was the most talked about cop chief before him? Was it his immediate predecessor?
No.
So what I'm saying is that over time, inherently more frequently than not, the highest person in charge is not always going to be the one we look at as like the best, the Daryl Gates of LAPD.
Hands down, I agree with you.
And so what I'm saying is that inevitably there is always going to be some sort, when they choose to sign on that line that they're going to be that appointed elected official, whatever it is, and they are at will of the council, the board of supervisors, whatever the organizing body is that can tell you tomorrow you don't have a job, there's no way around it. You're going to pander. It's the good ones, in my opinion, who understand the game of politics, who can say, okay, I need to give you a little bit while I make sure I'm not taking too much away from my people.
Managing up and managing down. That part I understand.
And so I think inevitably, that is what's always going to be there. It's just going to be times like now where it gets magnified because we're all mad that we want police work to be the way it used to be. We want it to be fun. We want it to be that thing of, hey, go out there and put the bad guys in jail and understand that we got your back. And as long as you don't do anything stupid out of policy, you got nothing to worry about. But we don't have that anymore.
Agreed. I agree with you.
And so with that, I would say that there are pockets. Riverside County, California, for the most part, is free from a lot of that. You know, you've got a strong elected official, you got a strong law enforcement entity within all of the law enforcement agencies, so we don't see a lot of it. But it is going on in LA. It's going on in New York. It's going on in a lot of other cities.
Yeah.
Where the point that I'm on is, as much as it sucks, we ride it out. Try to figure out for each individual officer, figure out what works for you. If it means, man, I just can't do this job anymore, then go do something else. Go make your heart happy. Go be best for you and ultimately what's for your family. Because if you try to ride this out and just get more and more angry, more and more jaded, you're not going to benefit you in the long run, and you're not going to benefit your family in the long run. If you can say to yourself, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to constantly keep challenging myself to promote up so that I can always be that voice of reason at the table of, hey, boss, chief, what about this? Be that fly in the ointment that constantly keeps saying, like, wait, let's not forget about this. You may get overlooked, but at least your voice is there. My biggest thing is just don't quit on the profession and ultimately quit on yourself. I know that's very Disney, you know, but I do honestly think that we can come out of this. We just have to find. I'll use the example, and I know this is a really stupid example. My old police department used to actually pay the car manufacturer to take the radio, the AM FM radio out of the car so that we couldn't listen to the radio while we were on shift. And then at some point in time, I don't remember which one it was, but basically it got to be more expensive to take the radio out than to just leave the radio in. So then in their bright-eyed way of dealing with this, we'll just pull the fuse so the radio doesn't work. How long do you think it would take for us to realize the radio's still there, but it doesn't work? And so now all of a sudden, all of us are walking around with our own little fuse that we pop in at the start of each shift. What I'm getting at is,
it's funny, huh?
We're all really intelligent. They put a barrier in front of us. Let's just figure out a way around the barrier. If it means in an over generalized way, kill them with kindness, I'll give the civilian review board everything. Hey, this is what I did. This is what I did. So, I don't know. I didn't work in an environment like you experienced, so I can't honestly give. What I'm just saying is that, all right, it's almost kind of like that FU thing. You want to put these parameters on me? I'm going to work within these parameters, and I'm still going to go do my job. Is where I'm at on it.
No, I think you have a great perspective. Absolutely, and I believe that we have to have hope. Right, hope is the key to everything.
Yes,
we have to hope for it to come back. We have to hope for fairness. That's why I ask, at least, if anything, right? I believe it or not, let me even circle back with that. I always say that we should be held accountable and we should have to explain our jobs. We have a lot of power. With power comes responsibility.
Yes.
This is one of the few professions, right? You could be at your precinct. I know what it looked like, but I know my precinct, I had stores all around. I could literally walk outside. I would go to a store across the street to get a drink, right? I could walk outside, go across the street, get a cup of coffee, and see a shootout and have to, God forbid, take down two adversaries and still get my cup of coffee and go back inside and then have a discussion about what happened. And so one of the few jobs that you could shoot someone, right? I'm not saying you want to, but you have to take someone's life to save someone else's, right? For the good of public safety and get a cup of coffee. And right? So you should have to explain yourself. There's a lot of power to take someone's life or someone's freedom. You should have to explain it. We should absolutely be held accountable. But we should be treated fairly and given due process. And that's the part that I push. And if we can be treated fairly, then I could say we could do the job. And I know what you're saying about right. I kind of think with policing, there's really no right and wrong. I believe there's actions and consequences. Because you said it before, and I totally agree. There's no two incidents that are ever the same, right? I could have your look, you, God forbid, let's say you had a twin brother, and you both stole an item from a store and it chased you down. And the two incidents are going to be completely different. You're going to have different physiological and psychological responses than that other person, different bone densities, different psychological characteristics. It will be different. Absolutely, I agree with you. I just ask that we give police officers a fair and equitable treatment with due process so that they feel comfortable and supported to do their jobs, right?
I couldn't ask for anything more. So much could be taken away if leadership just stood up and said, "We got your back."
It sounds
now,
so great.
It seems so basic, but just let me feel like when I come to work each day, hey, if I do something stupid, I'm gonna have to answer for it. And if it legitimately is stupid to the point of being illegal, then that's on me. But at least let me know that you're gonna support me and say, hey, until we determine that you're out of policy, acting illegal, we've got your back.
I'm glad you said that, because I think about that all the time. And I say, how do we change that? Because this is where I see the problem with law enforcement is, right? So you're a uniformed officer. You're part of the troops, right? But as you get promoted, at some point you start to enter a political arena, right? If you're in the New York City Police Department, eventually you could move past the ranks of uniformed services, right? And you're now a commissioner, first deputy commissioner, police commissioner. The police commissioner is ultimately in charge. But you're not a uniform member. You're now you're politically appointed. You're now dealing with the city council. You're part of politics. That's where things get really corrupted. In a sense, well, you're a uniform member. You're not part of politics. Your concern is the troops, the morale, camaraderie, which is really important. And the leaders at some point, as you become part of politically appointed, it's now about you. And that's where I find the problem is that these political appointed leaders are self-serving. And I do believe that a lot of the politicians, mayors, they put in useful idiots because they know that these people, their concern is themselves, getting promoted or creating I always say that they create the pathway for their siblings. Not their siblings, for their offspring. I'll be good with this mayor because then when my son gets on the job, he'll take care of him, right? So it's always about, that's why I always said I never want anyone to have leverage on me. I don't want to owe anybody anything. So no one has anything over me. Because if I don't agree with you, right, but now I need to take care of my son, now I have to agree with you. So that's why I always think about how do we get to a point we don't have that. But it's kind of tough because we have a point where in law enforcement agencies where they become political. They're cops, but they're not really cops anymore. So that's where I think it changes the dynamics.
And the only thing I'll throw onto that is human nature. If I came to you tomorrow and said, "Hey, I'm going to make you a chief of police, and I need you to pick 3 captains from, let's say, you're back on the job, you're a lieutenant, I'm going to move you all the way up to chief, and I need you to make 3 of the lieutenants captains." Of those 3, I'm willing to bet at least one of them is a very good friend of yours.
I knew you were going to say that. Of course.
2 of them are going to have a similar work ethic to you. Okay? So now let's just flip that. I grab another lieutenant, make him chief or her chief. She's going to have one that's close friend to hers. You see what I'm saying? At the end of the day, if you're running an organization, you need to have those underneath you that you believe can work well with you and can work well with your organization.
Well put.
Unfortunately, many of the people who rise to the top, or a large number of the people that rise to the top to feed their ego, which means they're inherently skating on thin ice because they don't have confidence in themselves. So the last thing they're going to do is bring up people who are potentially going to challenge them. And
Brilliant.
Now
that hands down, I talk about that all the time. I don't even have to say, you just said verbatim what I say. Pretty much.
And the negative impact of that is then that regime can usually have control over an organization for about 5 to 10 years, depending on how young that chief is.
Right. Till there's an overhaul or
a new mayor, a new city council, whatever, whoever appoints that person has a dichotomy change, has a shift, and all of a sudden maybe they go from an aggressive pro law enforcement board to it's just
I agree.
It's that
well said, well put. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I get it. When we sit there and we say, oh, these political appointees, that's just freaking human nature. You know, I honestly don't believe that every time the decision to select the next appointee, does the person simply go by, do they, skills? There's so much of how do they interact? Do I like them? Do I not like them? I mean, that's human nature.
Oh, I agree, right? I do agree. Like, you want to have some people close to you that you just bond well with, right? I agree. I used to, but when I had my teams as a special operations center, I used to handpick the guys. I would pick guys I knew that they're guys I would not go out to a bar with or hang out with, but they're guys I would want to work with. But of course, do you want to have some people that are like-minded people? Absolutely. You want to have that comfort. So, but you wouldn't want to make everyone part of that. You're not going to make, if you had a friend you knew he was a total idiot,
of course,
you're not going to put him in that spot. Like, listen, I love you, man, but
Well, and the flip side to it is, so say you're lieutenant and I'm your sergeant, or I get promoted to sergeant and you and I are friends. It's more my responsibility as your friend to never put you in an awkward position as my boss. If anything, you should demand it more of me.
Agreed.
You should be able to pick up the phone and go, Paul, why are you causing me grief?
Exactly.
Because I don't think a lot of people look at it that way. At least when I promoted up, I got to work for some great leaders, but that was always one of the things that drove me was, okay, yeah, I happen to also be friends with this person.
Yeah.
That's makes it even more incumbent upon me to make sure that shit doesn't go up to them.
No, I think that's a great way to put it. Absolutely. I agree. And you're also doing the right thing by people. Right? Well, that goes back to what I was saying earlier about this detective that they made deputy commissioner that did not go through the grind. I think that his people embarrassed him. They put him in a spot knowing he's not ready for it. Speaking to the public, they should have looked at it and said, listen, we care about you. We want you to move up, but you're not ready yet.
Can you make commissioner without ever having been a cop?
Yes. Yeah, there are deputy commissioners that were not cops. And, there's like a deputy commissioner of intelligence. She's a professor at a school. That's another story. But, yeah, you don't have to take the test. You could be the police commissioner and never have served in law enforcement. Or the predecessor to the commissioner now, she was a police officer in Nassau County, and she was the police commissioner for NYPD. So, which is huge difference. So it was a department, I think, maybe 2,000, compared to 35,000. So, yeah. But most of the police commissioners were in law enforcement.
Let's talk about something fun.
Sure.
Your podcast.
Awesome. Love it.
So your friend actually started it first.
Yes.
And then brought you into it.
Yeah.
What's your guys' ultimate vision for your podcast? Is it strictly, because I know right now it's New York's Finest is the name?
New York's Finest. Can I plug it?
Please.
Sure. Check it out, please. New York's Finest, Retired and Unfiltered podcast.
But
it's myself and another retired lieutenant, John McCarry, both former NYPD.
I was going to say the episodes that at least that I've seen, you're still staying focused though on NYPD. At least that is the subject matter.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Is that kind of where you're going to the vein that you're going to stay in?
Well, so initially, it's funny. This thing has taken off in all different directions that we never expected. Initially, as I said, my last tenure in the police department, I was attacked by the Civilian Complaint Review Board. I had 8 sets of administrative charges. I was facing termination. I did not think I was making out. And I started hearing about this guy, Johnny Mack. Let me get some more. I'm sorry. So I started hearing about this guy, Johnny Mack, that's speaking out. He's all over social media. I'm like, Johnny Mack, who is this guy? So I look. Oh, that's my buddy. We worked together as rookies. Right, so John actually decided to retire. He vested out early. He, based on his religious beliefs, he refused to take the vaccine. So there was a vaccine mandate. So John started speaking out. He created the podcast where he was just interviewing retired cops, memorializing their careers. He was pretty expressive to politicians about the mandate. about other issues with policing on social media. And then, so I reached out to John and said, listen, I'm retiring soon. I can no longer do what I'm paid and trained to do. I don't even know if I'll make it out of here, but either way, I'd love to come on, memorialize my career, tell my story. It went viral. It did pretty well. So John and I said, listen, I said to John, why don't we both have a vast amount of knowledge. I'm the most complaint cop. He was the civilian complaint review board liaison with the internal affairs, the liaison from that independent watchdog to the internal affairs. Let's give our perspective and analysis of what's going on. Maybe we could watch a video. We could talk about the use of force. So that's how we kind of started. I do believe that our reach in New York City is far greater than what you see with the numbers on the followers are. There's been pretty much a gag order within the police department. People are scared to talk to us, the cops, because we've been pretty critical of the upper echelon. We talk about policing. We're just giving our opinion. We're giving our anecdotal experience. Talk about some factual data. I've even had a Cop Watch. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. Cop Watch is this organization that's anti-cop, and they go around filming cops, and they've watched me for years, and they would put my face up on social media and say I'm a criminal and all this kind of stuff. I even had the founder of it on the podcast, because I always say opposition meets opportunity. So, and that's what we respect everybody. I want to know where this ideology came from. So it's been fun. We talk about an array of topics. We've had somebody on. She wrote a book called Surviving Retirement. We've had people on talking about self-defense, all different types. We've had politicians. Sometimes me and John, we just talk about incidents with the police department. We critique the leadership. Maybe there's an incident that happens. We'll give our opinion on use of force. We had a podcast called Make the NYPD Masculine Again. There was an incident that happened with an off-duty captain recently. So we did an episode of why no cop should work alone. And I think that it's really good content. I think we're becoming some type of, I really do believe all of us are in this new realm, a new genre, and I think it's called police media, honestly. I think police media is this new genre. We need more of it to give our perspective so people see really the human element talking about police work. Most of the time we hear politicians and people say, oh, hug a cop, thank a cop. But now we're actually given detailed descriptions of police work, the politics around it, not just true crime stuff. This is, I think, a complete new genre. It's media for policing.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, is that it is a double-edged sword. Because didn't NYPD just get smacked for the organization's social media posts? Did I hear something about that recently?
You're 100% right. We just did actually, that has a big factor, a big contributing factor towards the podcast. So myself and John, we've actually been attacked by a unit in the police department called CRT. It's called the Community Response Team. They're a quasi anti-crime team. They do the same work I used to do, but in a uniform. Instead of wearing the blue pants, they have tan pants and this quasi uniform, and they go out and they do intrusive police work, looking for firearms and things. And they actually work for the chief of patrol and this deputy commissioner I was telling you about. But because we've been pretty critical about what the leadership is doing, this unit came in. Basically, it was like a smear campaign of myself and John and trying to suppress us from doing the podcast, really trying to shut us down. And from that, they've attacked some of the tweets we have, and we're all over Twitter, and we put out satirical memes on a daily basis. They're comedic, but they also send messages of what's going on in police work. If you see the memes, they're pretty funny. I don't know if you saw any of them.
I haven't.
You got to look on Twitter. The finest Unfiltered. It's pretty funny. You'll see the memes, and they should laugh. Honestly, the leadership, we make fun of some of the things they say. It's little pictures, and instead of laughing, you said it, egos, because we have people that are not prepared to be in this position. They let their egos trump everything. So we've been attacked. They were attacking us on social media, but now they went on attacking journalists. There are some leftist journalists that are completely anti-police and say some ridiculous things about police work, but I still think that the police department, took the wrong approach. They should stay apolitical. Some of the posts they put out, it sounds like they're electioneering themselves. So it's really a problem, and it doesn't look professional.
That's what I was saying. It's definitely a high wire act for an organization to start pushing back on social media.
Yes.
It almost kind of seems like that's when you just really kind of go the opposite way and just put pictures up of freaking little kids and bunnies and, just completely just generic type stuff. But I saw a headline recently.
Well, the problem is again, this goes back to what I was saying. So the police department no longer has, there's no pyramid anymore, which there should be of who is in charge. And the police commissioner who's in place right now is very insignificant. He's really a puppet. The mayor has put him in that position, but he's not really the commissioner. We know the real commissioner is this other deputy commissioner I spoke about. He's just not prepared for it. This other commissioner is very insignificant. Most insignificant I've seen for a police commissioner. He's not really in charge. So it's almost like different MCs trying to come together. The chief of patrol, this deputy commissioner, the chief of department, they're all doing their own thing. There's no direct leadership. It's really caused a problem and a vision for the rank and file. Especially now with these protests and riots, it's really blurred the lines.
I just go to some of the veterans that I've spoke to, and when you start looking at the Army's trying to pull their piece and the Navy's trying to pull their, it's always a power grab. It's always a little bit, unfortunately, it's always a little bit of a power grab. It's always a little bit of, I want what's best for mine, kind of deal. Yeah. So.
You said it, mine. And that's the problem, right? We have people that are self-serving in these positions. And, I mean, I guess the argument could be made if there was a Republican mayor, we would get his type of personnel, and they would be self-serving for themselves. But at least we need to bring this back to where it's a victim society and not a criminal first society. That it's unfortunate right now. New York is decimated. And same thing here in California. These policies are just completely erratic. It's inconveniencing everyone. It's costly for everyone. I mean, look, right now you go into a CVS or Walgreens. I mean, if you're the consumer,
it's ridiculous.
You're inconvenienced for 20 minutes. You have to wait until someone can get you toothpaste.
Yeah.
Right? Everything's locked up and boarded, so everyone's affected by it, right? You have to wait 20 minutes to get your item. It's costing you more because that staff member has to bring it to you. So he has to get paid more money because he's doing more. He has to get that item for you. They have to have private security. So it's costing, we're all being affected by it.
I honestly believe when we go back to, what's going to be the catalyst for change, when big money starts pulling out of cities going, it's cost ineffective for us to operate in your city. And all of a sudden the tax base is gone. Then that's when you'll see big changes going back the other way. I'm
sure it's happening already. I would assume that businesses are fleeing California and New York for those very reasons.
But I think they're fleeing every city that operates that way, that doesn't take a stand on. I mean, I know that they're slowly. How do I want to put this? These organized retail theft rings where these people are running in, smashing grabs.
Yeah.
It's starting to change where it's like all of a sudden now they're starting to go, okay, we need to get this back under control. But unfortunately, it had to go to an extreme before somebody finally said, all right, enough. It's the same way. I know San Francisco, they had a lot of major companies said, we're just not going to have stores in your city. And now all of a sudden you're affecting the tax base of that city. Because ultimately that's how they make the city's not going to operate without a tax base.
Yeah, and we need the cities for revenue, right? It's not the suburban areas and the rural areas that are bringing up the economy. It's the cities. These are economic bedrock for every state. So absolutely.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden, you have the I'll call it the trickle impact. A city gets a reputation as not being safe, so you have all that we talked about, all the inconveniences on the people that live there, trying to get a tube of toothpaste, whatever it is. But now you start going to the next level of, well, now people aren't coming to visit, so now all the hotels are saying our rooms aren't. It's at the end of the day, money is gonna change.
Absolutely.
Is what's gonna make this change.
It's a domino effect, right? And it ultimately was affect real estate. Once you see the real estate go, that's the downfall to a society, right? I mean, we've seen it in the 70s. Again, I compare white flight, right? And then, we started to see it come back with gentrification, but now we see the great escape for the democratic city. So I that's why I do say when I hear you talk, I do believe there's hope because, what's the best prediction of the future? It's what we see in the past. So we have seen problems in the past. We've seen a turnaround. We've seen a pendulum. So I hope that we see it again. I'm hopeful. I do believe that that's the most important word. We have to have hope. In other words, we can't just give up, right? I mean, that's why That's why we do these things, right?
I would hope that people don't give up. I think if there's anything that I tell any young officer today is, please just don't give up. I get it. It's difficult, but it's going to get better.
I do believe you know, listen, the more we sit here, and I know it, that at some point it will, because America it really is like, Americans themselves, they're salt of the earth, honestly. Salt of the earth people. I mean, when we think about America, think about, not necessarily right now, I mean, but I do believe we'll get back to that point. When you think about America, like in the 80s and 90s, think about the guy loading up his truck with his family, you know, just like getting dirty, like salt of the earth people. I do think we'll get back to that. I mean, that's what makes us, like, you know, when people think of America, that's what they think of, you know, these salt of the earth people, and hopefully we get back to that.
I do believe we will, and I honestly think, like you mentioned earlier, the media plays us like puppets. Because they control what we see, what we read, and get us all spun up. But then when you boil it back down and you look at your neighbor to the left and the right, we're all basically the same. We want a roof over our head, we want our family safe, and we want our kids to be happy.
Pretty simple. Yeah, and we all want, like, listen, can we pay less taxes, please? You know, right? Especially middle class, right? I mean, honestly, if you're poor, you're not subject to certain taxes, right? And if you're rich, you have all kinds of tax exemptions. And I read Tax-Free Wealth, great book if you have an opportunity. If you're the middle class, the entire country is depending on middle class. Middle class pays all the taxes. So we need to bring it back to normal too, so that we actually can get that relief, that burden. Because with inflation, every one of us, we're all being hit by it. And crime is part of the inflation. Real estate. These are all things that affect. I mean, we can come back. I do agree on that part. And again, I always say that the best prediction of the future is a reflection of the past. So if we say that right now, then it will come back. Hopefully we can come back even stronger, right?
I think we will. I think that, you know, it's one of those things of going back to law enforcement. You look at how law enforcement was done in the 70s and then in the 80s and the 90s. There's certain things that I would never go back to doing. Let's say think of the guys that used to jump out of their radio car with no walkie-talkie, and they'd go off into a building, and they'd go off down an alley, and they had no way to communicate with anybody. Who would ever think about doing that in police work today?
No way, no.
You know, it's like my gun and I'm taking my radio.
Right.
You know,
yeah.
So there are certain things that change that you go, I'll never go back to that. There's going to be some change that comes out of all this that in 20 years we'll look back and go, yeah, we were better for doing it, whatever that is.
I can see that.
You and I don't get the benefit of seeing it. You know, we're now on the sidelines, and so we just got to keep pushing forward.
Absolutely, right? And you and I talked about it before, right? We started our careers not wearing body cameras. We had to transition to it, so we missed what it was like before. And the people now will never miss that because they didn't have it. So that's why I did say to the new guys starting out with the body cameras, you're in a better position than I am because this is all you know.
Yeah.
You know, you don't know what it's like before. So, right. You're going to conform right to it.
It's just going to be just another piece of equipment.
That's how, you're right. That's how you learn police work.
Yep.
You know? Like, I remember when I first got body cam, I was like, oh my God, how are we going to do this? I felt like an actor. You know, it was like, this didn't feel real. You know?
Sir.
Yeah. Sorry, you go with that, but somehow, eventually, you became numb to it and I got used to it, you know?
The one thing that I've always loved about this job, and I think that maybe this will be something that happens again with the younger people. Just get out and talk to people. Just get out of your car and just go up to people. Hey, what's going on? You know, I don't think a lot of cops do that as much anymore. So maybe that changes.
I agree with you, right? But that's why I think it comes down to leadership. The leadership needs to say, like, listen, go out, engage the community, talk to them, and listen. We support you. But the problem is optics, right? Like, I don't know about. So for New York City, they implemented a new legislation called How Many Stops Act. So if you're having a conversation with someone and you maybe ask any objectable questions, you have to fill out a report. So if a guy's waiting on the corner, you can't even say like, "Hey, buddy, you lost? You need help?" That would be a report. So now they've created this environment where we're actually causing the police officers to not engage the community. Because they want to document everything.
Right.
The legislative body to have data to say there were more people stopped or more people that were engaged at a disproportionate rate. 97% of people that were disproportionately engaged by the police were black. And, that's a problem. This is far overreaching. I always use the correlation like this, and this is what I say. What the legislative body is doing to the police right now is creating this mirage. They're creating all this legislation and inaction, giving the illusion that the police could still do their job effectively as they could before, but they can't. So this is an analogy I give. You watch the movie Gladiator, right? In the end of the movie, before the last scene, before the Emperor and Russell Crowe have their last battle, the Emperor stabs him in the back, kisses him on the cheek, puts the armor on him while he's bleeding, gives the illusion that he's fighting, nothing's wrong with him, but meanwhile he's bleeding in the back. That's what I feel has happened to the police. The legislative body stabbed them in the back, put the armor on them, said go out there and keep the city safe, but they're bleeding. That's the way I see it.
For somebody looking from the outside in, it would not be hard to view it that exact same way. Maybe I have a different view because I didn't operate in a similar environment. And that's the one thing that you and I will always have a difference of. And so maybe my view and maybe my goals are a little too optimistic. I'm hoping not.
I like the optimism. I think it's good. And that's why I say I am optimistic. I want to get better. That's why I'm speaking. But what I'm saying is this is where I believe we are at. Unfortunately, at least for New York City, that's the way I do view it.
We opened with you talking about trips that you took. So Thailand, Rio, or Brazil.
Thailand, Malaysia, Bali. Awesome.
Now, I know you ended up here in Southern California for personal reasons.
Yes.
But what's on the horizon for you as far as travel?
I don't know. I think I'm going to stay here for a while. I really like California.
It's a great state, huh?
Oh, it's awesome. Best weather. I mean, I love it. You're never really sweating. You're warm. It kind of reminds me of when I was in the Marines. I was out in the Carolinas. It's kind of similar where during the day, you got to wear a T-shirt. You're hot. Well, actually, you wake up, right? It's kind of cool. You got a sweatshirt on. Then also during the day, you got to take it off. You got your a T-shirt. And then at night, you need that sweatshirt again. So I like it. It's really nice. I went to SeaWorld for the weekend in San Diego. Awesome. San Diego's really, really cool. I really like it here. It's really cool.
How's your family liking it here?
Love it. Yeah, it's it's really a lot of things to see. The highways are amazing. Traffic is wild, but the traffic doesn't stop.
It's never ending.
Like 2 miles, it's like an hour.
Yeah, people don't realize. I had a friend come out from South Carolina, and we were driving on the freeway at 10 o'clock at night. He's like, this is as much traffic as we have at 5 p.m. in rush hour.
Yeah, he's like, where are all these people going, right? Yeah. I forget about it. In LA, it's like, a mile, like, ugh. That could take a long time. But yeah, I definitely...
Pack a lunch.
What's that?
Pack a lunch.
Yeah, pack a lunch. But no, I like it here. It's pretty cool. I definitely recommend that everyone at some point in their life do some traveling. And my kids did it. I think it's the best education. It really is.
Especially outside this country.
Outside this country. I think it makes you appreciate this country even more. And appreciate also other cultures and understand that, sometimes I think that Americans are kind of blindsided to believe that they're the center of the universe and the only ones occupying this planet. I don't know the exact data, but Americans have the least amount of passports than any other country. But most people are pretty mobile. Most Americans never even leave the country.
Right.
And there's so many beautiful states to see. But I do think people should go outside this country. I can say Asia, everybody should see it. Awesome. The people are amazing. It's really safe too. Very safe. I know people have heard. I've talked to people that they ask me questions about travel and they're kind of fearful of Asia. Like, not what you think.
There's people who are fearful of going to New York.
I think America. I've been to the ghettos of America, far worse than Asia. Even Brazil is worse than Brazil. And in Brazil, I went to some favelas there, but I think America is the worst. Honestly, and don't get me wrong. With that being said, America is still the best as a whole. It really is. Salt of the earth. We could get back to it. I hope so. I
appreciate your time, brother.
Likewise. Awesome.
Great talking.
Yeah, thank you.
I appreciate you watching. But before you go, if you like the video, please hit that subscribe button. Also, any comments are appreciated. Thank you.